Sarah sees her work as a publisher as an opportunity to bring African writers telling their stories of life on the continent to readers worldwide. Sarah Odedina has worked in publishing for more than 2 decades. As the publishing director of the Children's List of Bloomsbury Publishing, she oversaw the publication of the Harry Potter series as well as published many other best-selling prize-winning novels and picture books. Growing up in Accra, Ghana as a young girl who read voraciously, Deborah Ahenkorah often wondered why the storybook characters she loved did not look like her. Starting as a teenager, she has built and led several organizations, all of whose goals have been to give children across Africa culturally relevant books to fall in love with. Her publishing house, African Bureau Stories, is committed to providing increased opportunities for African writers and illustrators to publish locally and internationally. Please welcome Sarah and Deborah to this professional workshop titled Write Like a Pro.
Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see you all. We're very sad we can't be with you in person, unfortunately, but we're here. And we're really looking forward to spending the day with you, talking about writing, expressing yourself, finding the best way of sharing your story with the world. I'm going to hand over to Debbie, I think, who will introduce Akada to you and tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing, and then we can get going on our workshop.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're really excited for today. The Akada Children's Book Festival is such a wonderful platform, and we're really proud to be able to be a part of it this year. I'll introduce our company, Akada Literary, and explain a little bit, why we are organizing this workshop, what we do, how we can further engage beyond this one opportunity. So Akada is a literary agency, basically, but with a little bit of a unique model for the African children's literature space. What our winning aspiration, our end goal is as a company is to see wonderful stories from across the African continent written by authors such as yourselves, published for children all over the world in as many markets as possible. We want children to be growing up loving African characters in the same way many African children grow up loving characters from around the world. We do that 2 ways. The first way is by mentoring, training, and supporting writers grow through their craft. The thing we believe at Akada, that is the guiding principle, is that great authors, great stories are not just born or don't just happen. They are results of a great deal of hard work. And we believe that the craft of writing is one that can be cultivated and grown. So through our mentorship and training, we help writers take their work to the next level, and we help them to prepare the manuscripts. The second part of our work is representing authors. So once we have published ready manuscripts that we think can do well on the international market, we sign commercial relationships with authors where we represent them to publishers around the world, and we secure publishing deals for authors who then an advance on their royalties and continue to receive royalties on those works, and we receive a commission for our work. So yeah, we are an agency as well as a almost like a training opportunity for writers across the continent. We've been organizing workshops like this over the past, this may be our 4th or 5th one. And our goal with these workshops really is to enable us to share what our experience is in terms of what makes great children's books, what are the fundamentals of fiction, what are the things that through the editorial work that we do and the submissions that we receive, what are the things that we see to be where most writers are falling short, and what are some of those tips to get ahead in those spots. So I'll hand over to Sarah. And I think towards the end, we will talk about our current open call. We will also talk a little bit about the current publishing deal we have in the US that is actively looking for African writers to be published. And I'll hand over to Sarah. I think the last thing I'll say is, for us, this workshop is only as useful as you engage, is only as useful as you're taking in. So we hope that what we are sharing, is clear, and if there are any questions at all throughout the process, to share. But to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Debbie. So welcome to the Akada workshop, Write Like a Pro. As Debbie said, our goal as a business and as publishers and as people with a real focus on children's books is to bring the best of writing to children around the world, representing lots of different stories and lots of different backgrounds and cultural perspectives. The world is hungry for great children's books, and particularly so, I think, at the moment, for stories that have traditionally been a little less represented outside of national borders. The US and the UK have really woken up to the fact that there is a market in their own territories for stories that reflect backgrounds of some of their readers, as well as backgrounds that some of their readers need to have a better understanding of. And Accord is really working hard to encourage writers living and writing on the continent to get their stories into the most professional shape and share those stories with readers around the world, both in Africa and internationally. As Debbie said, we profoundly believe that great writers aren't born, they are developed, they grow. They grow through practice and learning and reading and paying very close attention to the craft. However, we do believe that people with great ideas are born. And that's the defining thing about a great writer, is somebody who has a really unique and individual idea which they can bring to readers. So, what is an author and what is a story? A story is a series of events tied together to make a compelling narrative that somebody else will want to listen to or want to read. It's very simple. I think stories are one of the things that motivate us as human beings. It's one of the things that makes it possible for us to communicate, to share our lives, to share the lives of other people. Stories aren't only written down, they're also shared on a daily basis. When you get home from work, when you get home from school, you narrate the course of the day to somebody. You narrate an encounter that you've had with somebody, and you share those experiences in the form of a story. And an author is somebody who makes that story available to readers. It's somebody who pulls all those threads and elements together and puts them into a form that's compelling and gripping and exciting and funny and sad and tense and all of those things that we look for in stories. And what we're going to try to do today is talk about ways in which you, as an author, can help to make your story the best it can possibly be. So, setting. What is setting? Where is your story set? And what is the world of your story? So what is the setting of your book? Your setting is not only the house or the school or the world that you've created. It's also the feeling of the world that you've created. It's the backdrop for the story. It's the mood of the story, and it's elements of the story, including culture, historical period, geography. The time of day is also the setting. So why is setting important? Setting is more than simply a geographical location or time period that serves as a backdrop to characters' actions. It's a place in a story, and it has multiple purposes and effects. Story helps you set the scene of your setting, helps you set the scene of your story, and it contributes to mood and tone and darkness and lightness. So, for example, a dark, eerie wood creates a very different sense of danger or mystery compared to a bright, open, joyful farm setting. Places restrict or open possibilities for your characters' lives and actions. A character living in a small mining town might have very different perceptions and options compared to a character who lives in a large urban metropolis. Places can evolve and change as your story progresses, and you can use their evolution to show the changing circumstances affecting your characters' views and options. So don't underestimate the importance of setting in your story. Setting should be almost as important to you as your characters, as the development of your characters. If your reader doesn't have a sense of place, it can often be very hard for your reader to really engage with the story that you're trying to tell them. So think about the place that you're setting your story. Think about the time of day, the mood that you want to share, and make sure that that's coming over well. Time is a very important element of story, of setting in a story. So without thinking about time, you're possibly not exploring some of the depths of your story. So time and setting. Historical novels will present your characters very different sets of challenges and experiences. A child living in Accra or London or Tokyo in the 1800s would have a very different life to that living in those same cities in 2021. And when you're writing novels set in different periods of time, it's really worth spending a lot of time thinking about what would have been available to that child and what is available to the child today and how those are different. Time in your novel also determines the kind of technology that's available. So, for example, these days, it's impossible to think of a child without knowing that you can be in touch with them instantaneously, either through social media or through their mobile phone. We monitor our children so much more than we did in the past. How would you, if you wanted to write a novel, and I think it's something that challenges children's authors a lot of the time, in which the child escapes from parental control, because children's books have to have the child independent and acting alone. How do you do that? And often writers have to set their children in a slightly historical setting in order to free them from those connections, or very importantly, have the child lose those connections early on in the book in order to free them. Time in your story setting is equally useful for showing and underscoring the changes that contribute to character and plot development. So changes in government, scientific discovery, social beliefs, customs, attitudes to gender, attitudes to class and social mobility. Those things change, and sometimes they don't change very much, but setting can allow you to explore that. You can put your character at a very pivotal moment in time and show a before and after scenario and help build tension. So, here are a few tips on getting elements of setting right. So research and plan. Sketch a rough map in your head of, if you're thinking of the big geographical locations, sketch a rough map in your head of the architecture, the customs, the flora and fauna, and research. If your book is set in contemporary times, use Google Maps, use the internet, look at images of the places that you are setting your novel. Even in towns that we know very well, if I was setting a story in London right now, but setting it in North London, a place that I don't know very well, I'd want to go and visit. I'd want to look at the place. I'd want to get a sense of the place. Create physical descriptions that make places memorable and distinctive. And what is the setting of your story famous for? Are there significant landmarks? Is there a general atmosphere of decay, or is your setting a thriving village or city? Really think about the detail and write it, describe it. Really think about how you want this to appear to other people. Reading all your wonderful pieces of writing that you submitted to take part in this workshop, I did feel that there was lots of room for more description of place. I wanted to know more about the places that your stories were set. I wanted to know more about the rooms that things were happening in, the towns that things were happening in, the countries that things were happening in, and the context in which things were happening. If you're setting your story in a historical setting, use historical accounts, look at atlases, read diaries. Writing about the real place that existed in the past is possible because there's so much documentation that's available to people to use in research. So go and find it. And again, the internet is the most incredible resource that we really can make such huge use of. There's so much available online. Draw a map of your world, as I said, especially if it's an imagined world. In fantasy, we often create universes, but think about how that universe works, how it links to other universes, how your social group links to other social groups, and really map it out in your head. Think hard about it, work out exactly what you want to do. And remember that your setting, your place, and the time in which it is set is as important to the mood and the driving narrative of your story as character. And don't skimp on the work that's needed to build that place. Think about when you're drawing your world, the location, the time of year. Is it seasonal? For example, is it Christmas? Is it Ramadan? Is it rainy season? Is it winter? Think about the temperature, think about the climate, think about how people respond and behave at different times of the year. Think about what they're doing, think about excitement levels, and build that into your planning of your book. And the time of day, it's very important as well. If you're writing a spooky story, it can be easier to build tension when it's dark. I think it's very familiar to all of us that once the lights go down and it's dark, we start to see things diving around in shadows that we wouldn't see it in the bright midday sun. So think about everything, and don't be at all shy about going further into research and thinking about how to find out more about your setting. So we're going to do a few writing exercises. We've kicked off really well. We've got lots of time, so I'm going to ask people to do some writing exercises. So here's some options of things to describe, which are based on thinking about the geography of your setting rather than anything else. So I want you to think hard about giving the reader a big picture of the place that you're talking about. So I would like somebody to describe a shop, and the shop can sell anything, and but think about what it's like when you enter the shop, think about what's in there, think about the mood, think about what the shopper is going in to find. Describe, another option is to describe a petrol station with people selling, hawking food, and lots of people around the petrol station. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Is there a long queue? Think about all the detail. Describe a child's bedroom. So just choose one of these things. Obviously, we don't have time to choose or to do all of them, but describe a child's bedroom. What makes that bedroom unique? What's special about that room? Is that room a happy place, or is that room a problem place for the child? Remember that setting has mood as well as sheer description, and think hard about how you might do that. What does the child see? What do they do? How do they react to the spaces around them? What are their feelings about vegetation, animals, expanses of green, few houses, people working on the land? So if we can just take, let's take 10 minutes just to write down your thoughts. It doesn't have to be in the form of a story. It's just a description. So just imagine yourself standing in any one of those places that we've talked about. So there's a shop, there's a petrol station, a garage, there's a child's bedroom, and there's a visit to the countryside. And think about what it would feel like, what it would look like, what time of day it is, what the weather's like. And we'll come back in 10 minutes, and we'll hopefully we'll be able to share some of people's writing.
Wake up, Jude. I opened my eyes at the prompt of my mom's voice. Are we there yet? I asked. I do not like road trips, especially when mommy woke me up too early to go on them. Mommy knew this. Yes, Bobby, you are here. I opened my eyes wider and stepped out of the window. I couldn't stop the leap I took next to hold on to the window. I was thoughtless and speechless for a minute. It was unlike anything I have ever seen. Why did grandma always make it sound so old? It was beautiful, green, big, and normal. Oh, normal felt so good. I ran out of the car and I looked around. We got to Granny's just before sunrise and the sky was just awakening. The sky was just awakening lazily and slowly clearing as if hesitant to give way to the sun. And it was just fine because the air smelled so good, just like the beach in the evening. And my mom took me to the beach to watch the sunset every year on New Year's Day. I never thought I could see or feel that anywhere or anytime else. Oh, and the space. I could turn around and around and around and see green and space all around me. I felt so free. I ran into the waiting arms of Grandma. I want to see, take me. I pleaded. I wasn't sure what exactly I wanted, but I wanted more of this place. It felt more real, more normal than my apartment at home, or the little backyard that held only one swing in my play area. The space made me feel like I had the whole world to play in. The grass looked eager to have me lie on it, and the flowers popping and the little flowers popping out looked like they knew me, and they were smiling at me like they liked me.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much for reading that. I'm going to ask you to read it again a little more slowly because some of us who aren't with you had a bit of trouble keeping up. Would you mind? And just to reassure everybody else, there's going to be lots of opportunity in the day for everybody to read because there's going to be quite a few writing exercises to be done. So I'm going to be picking out people who aren't volunteering soon.
Okay. So I'm keeping to my children's room, said it all. Typically, this is how it is on Saturday evenings. Mayokun and Ewa share a room, which I told them that they must learn to share. To my left, toys were strewn and scattered on the floor, with what happened to be a tea party that was left off in a hurry. The walls, which were painted white, had been smeared with streaks of paint, which I guess happened when Mayokun was trying to paint his favorite animal. He loves dinosaurs. All around me, all I could see was clutter, clutter, clutter. I thought to myself, how I wish my wish to have a neat room for them seemed to always elude me, as they would always want it otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody got any comments on that? As somebody who has actually worked in children's publishing now for 30 years, not 20 years, so it's probably longer than some of you have been around, I have come to the firm conclusion that the defining feature of a children's book is the story being told from the point of view of the child. And that was a very good description of a bedroom told, I suspect, from the point of view of a parent. Did anybody else feel that that was that gave a sense of the frustration and concerns of a parent rather than of a child? And it was really well done, extremely well done, and noticing the detail of things like the paint on the wall, and also talking about the parental aspiration for a lovely room for the child. But it wasn't a child's point of view about the bedroom. And what I would love you to do when you get a chance and in your writing exercises away from the workshop is rewrite that scene from the point of view of the child. What does the child see of their bedroom? What's the child's sense of that room? Does the child find that
mess as irritating as the parent. And it would be a really interesting contrast between the two pieces of writing, I think, to look at them from two different points, to look at that room from two different points of view. Because I have never met a child who's worried about their bedroom being a mess. I don't think that's what keeps them awake at night. And I know every parent I know spends an awful lot of time trying to get their children to be tidier. So if you are interested in thinking about that piece of writing and continuing to develop it, think about who's seeing the bedroom and how they're experiencing it. Great. So thank you very much, everybody. So now we're moving on to character. And character, without a character that we care about, it's really hard to care about a book. I think if we can't engage with character, we're going to find it very hard to engage with the book. And how do we do that? How do we create our characters? So I think one of the first things to remember is that every character is unique, and a well-drawn character will help create a well-drawn plot. And that compelling characters that we really care about are essential to making the plot important to us. And of course, a book's packed full of characters. There's not only the main character, there's antagonists, there's secondary characters, there's characters who support the main character, there's characters who challenge the main character. But on the whole, we need a central character that for one reason or another we care about them. And there are occasionally books in which the main character is a flawed character, a character who has real problems and issues. But generally the main characters of books, and particularly I think the main characters of children's books, are people that we really want to champion, and people that we really want to care for. So how do we make our characters compelling? Well, for one thing, we have to remember that characters are not all one thing or another. Any character who is entirely good and always makes the right choices and always says nice things about people and always behaves themselves is possibly not going to be the kind of character that who's going to really hold our attention. And we want to see characters travel through a learning arc. We want to see characters develop. We want to see characters go on a journey, an emotional and physical journey, in the same way that we do in life, with challenges and hurdles that we need to get over. And in the hope that at the end, the characters are going to be more engaging than they were, more believable. So characters need to engage our emotions, and the author needs to reveal their humanity. They need to show the character caring and being cared for. Characters need history. They need relationships. They need things that matter to them, that they're questing for. You need to build into your writing that sense of a whole human being. Characters often need emotional conflict. And if we think about things like star-crossed lovers or Harry Potter and the desire to deal with Voldemort in order, in part, to avenge the death of his parents, emotional conflict makes us curious about what a character will do. And it's very important to have an element of emotional conflict. And that can be an argument with a school friend. It can be sibling rivalry. It can be issues to do with a pet. It doesn't have to be huge, great, big events like Harry Potter and Voldemort. But any emotional conflict adds to the depth and empathy that we feel for characters. So you have to make your character want something badly enough to step outside their comfort zone and go on an adventure. If they don't want something, they're not going to act to make any changes. They're not going to try and do anything differently. They're going to carry on living their life in the way that they've always lived it. And that doesn't make for a wildly exciting novel either. You have to make them motivated. They must keep looking for it or trying to achieve it, even when the situation goes from bad to worse. And where you have to think about where these motivations and desires for something come from. Do they come from the distinct natures of the characters? Are the characters is your character naturally brave? Is your character given a quest that they have to go on? Is your character trying to save their family? Is your character trying to heal a rift with somebody at school? What's the thing that, why do they want this thing so badly? What is the thing that forces them to take part in their adventure? And make them motivated. They must keep looking for it and trying to achieve it. Even, I think I've said this, even when the situation goes from bad to worse. Think about, do think about that all the time. And it's a really good idea to make a list of things about your character. Think about your character emotionally as well as physically. So what can go wrong when creating a character? Well, one of the big things I think that happens is that the writer is too keen that we like the character. Characters should actually be well-rounded, warts and all types of people. Sometimes having things about a character that we don't particularly like makes them more plausible and believable. A child who's quite stubborn, who learns through experience that stubbornness isn't very good for them, will make us care much more for that child, because we'll see the character go through a learning process. Your character doesn't only need good characteristics to be gripping. They need to be real people, and none of us are all perfect. Taking characters out of their comfort zones and showing them getting tired, afraid, irritable, anxious, jealous will show them in a more fully rounded context. Think about writing in scenes that will let us see the character in those situations. We need to get a sense of the internal life of a character. Showing characters' reactions to things helps build a sense of that character. If they're caught doing something they shouldn't, we need to know how they feel. If they're caught sneaking back late from a party after being categorically told to be back by 9 p.m, how do they feel about it and why? They might feel it was worth the trouble they were in because they had a great time, or they might feel mortified that they had upset their parents. If someone gets a detention for getting in a fight, they might feel horrible that they have blotted an otherwise blemish-free school record, or they might feel really proud that they stood up to defend someone who was being bullied. So think about behavior, think about things that the character does as ways for us to get an insight into the character. It's really good to try and create enigmatic characters who are exciting to our curiosity. And this is not done by underdrawing them. It's not done by failing to flesh out their description. It's done by creating conundrums. So if you're creating a character who's not to be entirely trusted, who's involved in something duplicitous, think about putting in dates that don't add up. Think about them telling small lies or big lies. Think about ways in which you can create a sense of them as somebody not to be trusted. Don't, again, back to show, don't tell. Don't tell us this character isn't to be trusted. Show us them doing something that we as readers immediately know isn't true. And then you've immediately created a doubt in the reader's mind about that character, and that's a really good thing to do. So as an important element of a book is not only the main character, the hero, but it's the antagonist. And they're really, really important for creating well-rounded, believable stories. But they shouldn't just be there as foils to the hero of the piece. They too need context. They need family, they need friends, they need conundrums, they need an internal life. They need to have all of the things that your main character has. So, for example, a baddie, an antagonist, isn't all bad. Generally, they also love their mothers and are loved by their mothers. They generally also have friendship groups that they want to take care of. They generally have things that they care about that soften their edges, but it's just in conflict with your main character if they exist just in conflict with your main character, and it's a very kind of flat, not very three-dimensional fleshing out of a person, then they become, they kind of lessen the, they lessen the whole picture of the novel and start to make it feel less plausible. So it's not simply enough to be there to act in opposition to your hero. Those characters need to be as well-rounded and well-realized as your protagonist. So when you think about your characters, make lists. Think about them as real people. Write descriptions of them. Write lists of things that they like and don't like. What do they look like? How do they wear their clothes? What's their room like? What are their relationships like? What do they like to eat? Where would they sit in class? How would they behave if the bus was very crowded? What are the things that make them frightened? What are the things that they like to do in their spare time? What are the books they like to read? Think about them as real people and compose lists of attributes for all your main characters. Which is often very important in books for young readers, you're creating a friendship group and you have 3 or 4 main characters who are acting together to drive the narrative of the story. Create different profiles for each character and make sure those profiles make them seem like different people. It's often very easy to create 4 characters who are all very similar. They're just slight tweaks on one another. But think about them as each as really unique people. And why are they friends? What makes them stick together as a group? It's also important to think of your characters' backstories. What's happened to them? What are their lives like? Where do they live? What are their parents like? What do their parents do for a living? What's their access to education? What's if they're girls? How do they function in the world? If they're boys, what's their attitude to superheroes? And just really don't hold back in building this character sketch for yourself. Another manifestation of children's books often is anthropomorphic stories. A lot of writers write stories with animals as the central characters, but those animals have to inhabit human characteristics. They have to have human characteristics as well. And a recent book, Skunk and Badger by Amy Timberlake, is a really wonderful example of the way in which the author has taken 2 animals and given them human characteristics and set them in a imagined story, living in the same house. And the first page, the book opens with this. The first time Badger saw Skunk, he thought, puny, and shut the front door. Badger didn't normally shut the front door on animals that knocked, but there was too much slick in this one's stripe, too much puff in his tail. Also, there'd been that grin and the way he'd stuck out his paw, as if he'd been looking forward to meeting Badger for a long, long time. Badger knew what to make of that. He shut the door before the fellow got any ideas. "Not buying anything," he said through the keyhole. When the knocking continued, Badger added, "Ever," and he drew back the bolt and the double bolt and latched the chain. "Quartzite," Badger thought briskly as he padded back into his lock room. Aunt Lula's brownstone row house had not come with a rock room. Badger had made improvements. So just from that piece of writing, I think we've got a really good idea of what Badger's like. And he's not particularly nice. He's jumping to conclusions about this person that knocks on his door. And he's a badger, he's a little animal, but the author's given that badger real character and very plausible characteristics. So here is a piece of writing which is from a book called Pirates by Celia Rees. We read a little bit from her book Witch Child earlier on. "I was not afraid to be out at night, but I reloaded the gun as we drove along so I would be ready for any danger that we might encounter. Jamaica was a lawless place, and so were the Downs at home. To drive along any lonely road was to risk an encounter with a highwayman. We met no traffic and all was quiet. When we reached the plantation, the house was in darkness as I went up the steps. I wondered that no lamp was burning and called for Phyllis or Minerva to come and attend me, but was greeted by silence. I sparked a flint and lit a candle for myself and went in search of them. One or the other usually stayed in the house at night to see to our needs, and I'd expected to see both on our return as we had not planned to stay at the Brazilians' plantation. I had no sense of foreboding. I just thought it unusual, neglected in a way that was not like them. Perhaps I had in mind some gentle scolding as I made my way to the kitchen. Phyllis was there sitting at the table, perfectly still against the moonlight, like a statue carved from ironwood. She roused herself and turned to the glow from the candle in my hand. Her face changed as she saw me, her eyes showing white in the darkness. She looked at me as if I were a ghost. "What's the matter with your neck?" My hand went to Bartholomew's rubies. I was still wearing them. "A gift from the Brazilian," I paused. "He wants to marry me." "So dukes say." Her voice dropped to a murmur. "I thought I saw your death upon you. I thought you'd come back in spirit. Looks like someone cut your throat." She went to rise, to come to me, but her arm trembled on the table leg, and she slumped back down as if the effort were too much for her. She'd always seemed so strong, tireless, and indomitable. I was alarmed to see this sudden weakness and immediately put the candlestick down and went to see what ailed her. She held the neck of her gown, clutched in one hand. Now I could see that it was torn, split, front and back, hanging in pieces like two flags, stripped and stained with fresh blood. She tried to turn away from me in a slow, wincing movement, as if she were ashamed for me to see her condition. "Who did this to you?" I asked, as if I could not guess. "Duke beat me." "Why?" I'm just going to open the next page. Because he likes to, because that is what he likes to do. She put her hand to her head, brushing her fingers over her eyes in a gesture of weary despair. "Don't bother yourself with this, Miss Nancy. It's nothing to do with you." I'd be the one to decide what was and was not to do with me. I felt anger growing inside me, fueled by all the things I had seen since I came to this beautiful blighted country. I felt it bloom into a fury as I brought the candle round to see what he had done. The scars on her back were not new. Fresh stripes glistened in long, streaked, criss-cross patterns across her back, where the flesh was ruched into sharp-ridged peaks, so rucked and buckled that it no longer resembled flesh at all, but looked as though she was encased in a garland of thorns. "Where is he?" "In his house." Phyllis looked up at me. She had endured everything, never been known to cry, but now the tears spilled from her eyes. "He took Minerva. I tried to stop him." "That's why he beat you?" "Yes, but ain't nothing you can do, Miss Nancy. Best not to interfere. Don't need to make trouble for yourself. You be married soon." Her voice faltered. Her gaze flickered away as if she could no longer look at me. I left her staring at the steady flame of the candle. I still wore the pistol stuck in my sash, and I almost smiled as I felt the carved wooden grip snug in my hand. Nothing I could do. How many people had told me that? Well, now we would see. So I think that is a really fantastic. Are we still here? Sorry. I think that's a really fantastic description. And as I was saying, it shows us all sorts of things about that character, all sorts of ideas about her as a woman, as a young woman, her courage, her fortitude, her acceptance, and also at the same time we're getting quite a good impression of Phyllis and the abject cruelty that Phyllis has had to live with for however long in her life, and the girl isn't prepared to put up with that anymore. So let's do a little bit of writing. Think about how we can create our characters. At the end of this workshop, we'll share the writing exercises with you all so that you can carry on working on your writing, because I think one of the most important things to do as a writer is to write. And it's everything, writing all the time, writing diary, writing creative pieces, writing blog posts. Reading and writing are the two things that help us improve as writers. With all the time we have to work on our work, I think. So writing exercises. Describe your character. What are their favorite foods, their favorite TV programs, their favorite weekend activities, their favorite classes in school, their favorite pieces of clothing? And what do they like least? What are the things they like doing least? What at school do they like least? What food do they like least? What happens if they have to eat something that they don't like? Who is their best friend? What do they rely on that friend for? So think about them in terms of a list. Think about your character in terms of a list of things that they like and don't like. And literally just make a list of things. And let's have a look. And remember that, as I said earlier on, characters don't have to all be likable. It's really good sometimes to have characters that we don't like, characters who challenge us as readers, characters who we see travel through an arc of change. Write the next writing exercise is write about an argument between a brother and a sister. And the argument is because one of the siblings hasn't done something for a parent that they'd agreed to do, and the other one is trying to help them understand what's been going on, what they've done wrong. So it could be, for example, the one of the siblings had promised to feed the dogs, and they hadn't done it, and the dogs are hungry and the parents are about to come home. What kind of exchange is happening here? Right, so let's have a look at the encounter between two people and show us the different attitudes and responsibility levels between the two. If your character is, write about a situation in which your character is not allowed to do something that they want to do, that they've been told they can't play tennis at school, or they can't watch a program that they want to watch at school, or they can't have at home, or they can't have something bought for them that they particularly want to have. What is your character's reaction to that? So write about a moment in which your character is denied something that they want. So those are the three activities. Write your list. If you're working on a novel, if you're working on a book idea and you've got a character in mind, write a list of all of the things that you can think about related to that character. And if you have time, because it'll be another 10-minute exercise, write a list for your antagonist as well. And then write an exchange between siblings, which is about a conflict, or write a description of a child being denied something that they want. What's their reaction like? How do they react? Let us see what kind of person they are through that. Can everybody hear me? Just checking in.
Yes.
Cool. So is there anybody who's, I mean, I know that writing exercise is a little bit more about thinking about your characters for yourself rather than sharing, but are there any questions? Would anybody like to ask any questions about character building? Thinking about who you're writing about? No?
Okay, you have a question? Okay, you can just talk.
I should just okay. I want to read mine. I think she's asking for questions.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
No, I don't have a question.
Oh, you don't have a question? You want to read yours?
You want to read? Good. Please read. But so that we can all hear you on our screens wherever we are, could I ask you if you could read loud and slow, please? Thank you very much.
Loud and slow.
Okay. Sola sat down, seemingly in class, but with a mind quite far. Lots of things going around her mind. Questions. What do I do now? How will the others look at me? How did I even get myself into this mess? She took a look around and realized she was in a maths class. I'd better behave. Miss Udo does not. I'd better behave, so Miss Udo does not dig her fangs into me. She hated mathematics with a passion, and many times she has had a couple of drawn swords with Miss Udo. Trying to look like a serious girl to avoid trouble, somebody hit her from under the desk. Looking back, ready to spill, she realized it was her friend, her best friend, her partner in crime and all else. Ngozi whispered, "Hey girl, what thinketh thou in this esteemed class of graduates?" Tola laughed. Esteemed class of graduates indeed. You were just in JS3. Don't put me in trouble, please. Who says I'm a troublemaker? Ngozi whispered back. I just saw you were distracted. At that point, Miss Kudo finally got her cancer. Thank God, Tola said. That was very good.
Does anybody have any comments? Well, I loved hearing that. I liked the sense of a rather mischievous child who's also at the same time concerned about getting into trouble. So she's not just out and out bad, but she does seem to be a little bit a bit mischievous. So that's very that's really good character portrayal for us of the kind of girl that she is. Would anybody else like to read anything, or please ask questions? If there's any questions at all that anybody would like to ask, that would be great. We're here to answer
questions.
Hi, Ugo. Oh.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
So I was going to say, like, from listening to her, I could see two ways that she showed her character. Through like the character's internal thoughts, and then through the physical actions. And I was wondering if there are other ways that we can describe or show our character. So from there, I picked up dialogue, thoughts, and actions. But are there other ways that we can show our character without just describing what they look like?
Well, I think an important way of showing your characters is how other people see them.
Okay.
And that's much easier when you're writing in the third person than when you're writing in the first person. Obviously, when you're writing in the first person, everything is seen through the eyes of the character that you're writing about. So it's a much more one-to-one relationship between the reader and the character. Third person gives you much more space, and you can have other people say things about characters, react to things that other characters do, and then I think you can paint a really good broad picture there of character. But those are the main ways: what people say, how they act, how other people see them. Ideally, what we want to avoid is describing a character. So you don't want to say James was stubborn and never liked to. You want to show James being stubborn about something, so him refusing to change. It's much more powerful when we can show our characters rather than tell the reader about them. We want to be able to, in a way, that's the sort of definition of literacy, that we can read the words on the page and use those words to paint the big picture for ourselves. We don't need the writer to tell us what to think. We want to be able to produce it and work it out. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Okay, Cynthia.
Okay, I want to read mine.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Endo is taller than all her mates in high school. She's petite with very striking model-like features. She loves makeup and styling. Anything fashion is her jam. She has the heart of her grandmother. Very strict, no nonsense, straight shooter. She doesn't mince her words, which makes Wendo not like her very much. Wendo is playful and will say things not to do and not do them. Sorry, she's very playful and will say things and not do the things she has said that she will do. And this rubs Pendo the wrong way, as she is very meticulous. One time, they were partnered to do a certain arts project in school, and Pendo did most of the work, while Wendo kept giving excuses. They both presented the project and scored well, but Pendo was pissed. From then on, there's been bad blood between them.
Oh, great. Well, I immediately want to see something written by you which shows us these two characters in conflict with one another. maybe can I suggest that for a writing exercise, when you're doing some creative writing on your own, that you write the scene of the art project, describe that, write that scene to yourself. Think about when we finished the whole day and we've talked about dialogue and setting and description and all of those other things that we're thinking about, bring them all to play in writing up to about 1,000 words, really flesh it out like a short story of what happens in that art project. How are they chosen to be with one another? What happens? Who does what? What do they say to each other? How does it conclude? Because you've created two wonderful characters. You've given us descriptions of two great characters who show great potential for being in conflict with one another, and hopefully as well resolving that conflict. Thank you very much for sharing that. Anybody else before we move on to our next section, which is dialogue, which is possibly the hardest thing?
Go on. Jesse scratched off his face to show displeasure when his mother tuned down the volume of the TV set he was watching. Jesse, the mother shouted, "Have you written your homework?" Jesse did not utter a word but stared boldly at his mother as if lost. His mother's eyes took hard. "I hate repeating myself, and if you force me to, then you will have yourself to blame." Jesse reluctantly got up from the sofa he lay on and quietly went inside his room. Unknown to him that his mother was following him, he mumbled, "Is today not Friday? I have all the time to write my homework." His mother became upset and slapped him. Filled with anger, Jesse yelled, "Ah!" and shut the door angrily.
Thank you very much. Anybody got any thoughts on that exciting piece of writing? Does anybody which character in that did you came most alive for you? Hugo, tell us what you thought.
Is it Jesse? I hope the name I heard was Jesse. So I liked Jesse's character from the way that the author described him. I like that through his actions and his words, I can see that he just did not want to do the homework. So I feel like he described the character using actions and then using a bit of dialogue. So I quite liked. He sounds like a character I'd like to read about. Sounds interesting.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's great. And everybody's doing such good thinking about all the projects that we're looking at today. Thank you. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is dialogue. So, dialogue is one of the most important things in a book. Not only does it give us insight into the minds of the characters in the book, but it also is a vitally important way of imparting information to the reader. But dialogue can fail to work when it's used just to tell the reader about something they already know about, and when it's there just for the sake of conversation. So it's a very tricky balancing act, dialogue. It's hugely important. It works in two ways: to give us information about the character and to tell us information about the story. But it can also fail drastically when it repeats things that we already know, when characters are talking about things that we've already picked up as readers, and when it's there just for the sake of filling out the narrative. Always think about who is saying what and ask why they are saying it. Dialogue should always move the plot forward. Avoid having characters saying the same things and repeating one another. Use dialogue to tell us something we don't know, and it should be related to the character's goals and conflicts. Dialogue is also a good way of showing character. Habits of speech. Is someone bossy? Are they timid? Are they assertive? Do they have a relaxed attitude to the truth? And you can also reveal things through dialogue, through memories, anecdotes. They help us get an idea of who a character is and what motivates them. So some tips on writing good dialogue. First of all, let it flow. When you write the first draft of a scene, let the dialogue flow. This technique will allow you to come up with lines you never would have thought if you tried to get it right first time. Record what your characters are arguing about and stewing over and revealing. Write it all as fast as you can. And as you do, don't worry about attributes. That's John said, she said, he said. Just write the lines. And once you get these on the page, you'll have a good idea of what the scene is all about. Now you can go back and write the narrative that goes with the scene and the normal speaker attributes and tags. So literally just put it down on the page. Just let it come out of your mind and get onto the page. And then you can go back and fine tune it and take things out that are repetitions, but just literally just let it flow. Act it out. So when you have written dialogue that you're happy with, say it out loud. Play the part of each character. Give yourself time to come up with a response in each character's voice. You know how it is if you've had a conversation with somebody and the next day or the day after you think, oh gosh, I wish I'd said that. I should have said this thing in response to the comment that they made. And that's the same with writing a book. But the great thing about writing a book over real life is that you do have the opportunity to go back and put in that great response. Whereas in real life, we don't get the chance to go back and rerun our conversations. So think about writing dialogue as a process that you can go back and edit and fine tune, but have a plan in mind of what you want two characters to be talking about, and then know that it's going to take a while to get it absolutely right. So in dialogue, it's a really good idea to try to sidestep the obvious. One of the most common mistakes in dialogue is creating a simple back and forth exchange, each line responding directly to the previous line, often repeating a word or a phrase, which is known as an echo. So it sounds something like this. Hello, Mary. Hi, Sylvia. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing. Outfit? You mean this old thing? Old thing? It looks practically new. Oh, no, it's not new, but thank you for saying so. So there's no surprises here, and the reader drifts along with little interest. While some direct response is fine, your dialogue would be stronger if you sidestep the obvious. So another example. Hello, Mary. Sylvia, oh, I didn't see you. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing. I can't remember where I left my homework. So immediately, I think we've got a more dynamic sense of something going on with these two girls, and a more interesting sense of the energy between them. And you can also sidestep with a question. So, hello, Mary. Sylvia, I didn't see you. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing. Where is he, Sylvia? So immediately we're asking, why? Who is he? Why is she asking? What's she looking for? And why should Sylvia know? So the point is that there are many ways that you can sidestep. You can have a conversation going on, and you don't have to directly respond. Characters don't have to directly respond to one another, but they can use that conversation to drive the plot forwards. So another really interesting thing to do with dialogue is to cultivate silence. And sometimes dialogue isn't always about saying nothing. It's about saying nothing can often give a good insight into the mind of one of the speakers. So, example, should we have a drink? All right. The warm wind blew the bead curtain against the table. The water's nice and cool, Ian said. It's lovely, the girl said. It's really a simple thing, Jane, the boy said. It's not really sneaking out. The girl looked at the ground, the table's The girl looked at the ground the table legs rested on. I know you can do it, Jane. It's really not anything. It's just leaving a little earlier than usual. The girl did not say anything. In this story, the boy is trying to convince the girl to sneak out of the house against their parents' wishes. Jane doesn't have anything to say. Her silence is reaction enough. We know she's not keen. She's not having to say, no, I don't want to go. Her silence is suggesting that she's finding it really hard. Whether or not she goes, we know at this stage she's not keen at all. So polish your dialogue. Work and rework it. Read it aloud. Think about the tags. Don't use exclamation points unless entirely needed. Don't use adverbs to emphasize a point. She said angrily. He laughed nervously. Show us how people feel by how they use their bodies, the words they use to respond, the silences, the gaps that they leave, the way they change the subject. What are they looking at in the room when somebody else is talking to them? You think of the entire picture, not just the exchange of words that's going on between the two characters. So you can also employ confrontation. Many writers struggle with this in their novels, and often they heap exposition on in large chunks of straight narrative. So backstory, what happens before the novel opens, is especially troublesome. How can we find the essentials and avoid a mere repetition of information? We can use dialogue. First, create a tense-filled scene, and usually between two characters. Get them arguing, confronting each other. Then have the information appear in the natural course of things. So here's two examples. Here's the clunky way to do it. David Riverford was a new boy in school, having been expelled from his old school for bullying. That you could say that in a novel, and you would have told us about David Riverford, and the reader would have that knowledge of him. However, you could place the backstory in a scene in which David is confronted by someone who knows him through a mutual friend. So, I know who you are, Charles said. You know nothing, David said. You're the new boy. If you don't mind, from Hopkins High School. You got in trouble for fighting, didn't you? Yeah, that's it. So we see this backstory. The backstory is brought out through the conversation, and it's brought out in a very natural way. And I think much more interestingly than just simply being told that David Riverford was the new boy in school, having been expelled from his old school for bullying. This is a much underused method. It increases the pace of your story. It allows you to bring in detail without an information dump feel, and it helps build the characters. So all of those things that we've already been talking about are supported through using dialogue like this. So another thing is dropping words. So an interesting exercise is to sit somewhere and listen to conversation and make a note of what people say. And you'll notice really quickly that most conversation, they're not full sentences, words are dropped, there's characteristics, people's characteristics are shown through how they speak. And dropping words is a favorite technique of a writer, an adult writer who I really admire, Elmore Leonard. And he drops words and suddenly things start to sound like real speech. So here's a standard exchange. Your dog was killed? Yes, run over by a car. What did you call it? It was a she. I called her Tuffy. And this is the way Leonard did it in a book called Out of Sight. Your dog was killed? Got run over by a car. What did you call it? Was a she, named Tuffy. It sounds so natural, yet it's lean and meaningful. Notice it's all a matter of a few words being dropped, leaving the feeling of fresher speech. As with any technique, there's always a danger of overdoing it, but pick your spots and your characters with careful precision and focus. So show, don't tell. And this is something we've already talked about. This is a great example of ways that dialogue can show and dialogue can tell. So, Nell, I hold you and your constant use of social media responsible for the collapse of our friendship. That's quite a statement. That's a real tell. Versus, Nell didn't look up from her phone, as I said. I need to post this picture of me from last night. Hold on a minute. Jane got up to leave the table. You can't have people not knowing what fun you had. So we're seeing that Jane is not happy at all. I'm going to read that again. So Nell didn't look up from her phone as she said, oh, hang on, I just need to post this picture of me from last night. Hold on a minute. Jane, getting up to leave the table, said, well, we can't have people not knowing what fun you had. So again, we can see that the friendship is rather strained. Jane isn't happy with the way that Nell is not paying attention to real life, and she's using her social media to communicate. Beware of exclamations. Be careful with exclaiming, sighing, laughing, shouting. Show emphasis through the choice of words and through body language and through action. I will not go with you, he shouted angrily. Or, I will not go with you, he said as he quickly stood up, pushing the chair to the floor. So think of how you show people doing things rather than telling us that they're doing things. And then finally, tagging. John said, Jane said, she said, he said, mum said, dad said. You can have quite long pieces of conversation with just people going back and forth, saying things to one another. And maybe every fourth or fifth exchange, put in who's speaking, just to remind people. If your conversation is working, if your dialogue is working, and you've established a strong enough sense of your characters, the reader should not be in any doubt about who they're reading, who's saying what. If you're doing, which we gave an example of right at the beginning, the thing of just people copying what the other person's saying. Hello, Mary. Hi, Sylvia. My, that's a wonderful outfit you're wearing. Outfit? You mean this old thing? Old thing? It looks practically new. Oh, it's not new, but thank you for saying so. Within about 2 exchanges, you've got absolutely no idea who's saying anything in that conversation, because they're not really saying anything different to one another. But if you've got your characters working as well as they should be working, you don't actually need to say who's speaking very frequently. So I'm going to read you some examples of dialogue, which I think work really well. So, she has curly carrot red hair and eyes the color of molasses. She is tiny in the same way that a stick of dynamite is tiny. I saw Ada tuck a wisp of hair behind her ear and Jane press her lips together to redden them. Royal shrugged. Went out for a ride and ended up here, he said. Come to gaze at the lake, Fran teased. Something like that. How romantic. Ain't you got any work to do, Fran? Any children to scare or kittens to drown? Well, I guess I know when I'm not wanted. Hardly. Hey, Matt, you feel like taking a ride? I almost fell over. Me, I said, shading my eyes to look up at him. Get in, will you? I looked at my friends, not quite sure what to do. Fran winked. Go on, she whispered. Jane looked at me like she'd never seen me before. Well, yes, all right, I said, climbing up. Royal snapped the reins as soon as I was settled. Jane leaned over to Ada and whispered something in her ear. I realized I would be a topic of conversation amongst my friends for the rest of the day, if not the rest of the week. It was a strange thing. It was a strange feeling, worrisome and exciting all at once. Royal didn't say much as we rode west towards the entrance to the Big Moose Road, nor did I. I was too busy trying to figure out what this sudden appearance of his was all about. Want to go to Higby's? He eventually asked me. Man who works at the boathouse is a friend. They're getting the boats ready for the season. He'll let us take a skiff for free. All right, I said, thinking that this was all very odd. If it was some other girl, I'd have said Royal was sweet on her, but it was only me, and I knew better. Then I had another thought. Royal, don't you think you can kiss me again, or anything else? I won't have it, I said. He looked at me sideways. All right, Matt, I won't, not unless you want me to. I don't want you to. I mean it, I said. I'm not your batting practice, I thought. Someone to get it right with before you go to see Martha Miller. Hey, Matt, how about we just go boating, huh? All right, then. Good. So that's a really wonderful example of a conversation. I think that we don't have lots of tags. We get a real sense of their different characters. We have a lovely kind of friendly exchange between the different girls and Royal when he first arrives to pick up Matt. And then very brief but meaningful conversation between them as they go along, and the introduction of backstory, which we've talked about, where Matt says, "Royal, don't you think you can kiss me again, or anything else? I won't have it." So now we immediately know that there's some history between the two of them. So it shows, I think it shows all the ways that dialogue works really brilliantly. It's short, it's to the point, it doesn't echo, it gives us a sense of backstory, and we also get a real sense of character. We see that Matt, she can't quite believe that it's her that's in the skiff with Royal. You know, she thinks it's extraordinary that it should just be her. She never really saw herself as being a pretty or attractive girl, I think, from a comment like that. So there's also a couple of other pieces to read you. So dialogue, using dialogue to progress plot is really important. And this from a book called Boy 87 by Ellie Fountain. And again, at the end of the day, I'll share the reading list so everybody can see the books that these pieces have been taken from. There's a great exchange between a mother and a child that I think reveals something so important in this book, which is all, if and when you read the book, it's one of the most important elements of the story. So eventually, after we had cleaned up by candlelight, as there had been another power cut, I hear Lemlem gently snoring on the bed she shares with my mother. Now that the time has come to speak, I can't think of how to frame my questions. As my thoughts sprawl, I look over at my mother, sewing a colourful strip of fabric to the edge of a white gaby, finishing her day's work. She looks up at me and smiles. When will they tell you your results? She asks. Next week. Mum, Binny has quit school. She looks down at her sewing, concentrating, even though I know she could sew with her eyes shut. He's top of the class. She is silent. I feel the anger grow once more. This time it is sudden, like a flame on paper. Why would Sabah take him out of school? I mean, is school dangerous now too? The words remind me of what Kidane had said to us during lunch break yesterday. Someone at school, one of the older kids, said Binny's dad was dangerous. I think he was talking about Dad too. Why would he say that? Is there something else I have to be careful about? What is it this time? If Dad hadn't died, then perhaps I could have asked him. Perhaps he would have talked to me instead of ignoring me. I'm almost shouting now, and Mum leaps out of her chair and puts her hand over my mouth. Her hand smells of new fabric. Don't wake Lemlem, she says softly. But I know it's not Lemlem she's worried about disturbing. It's our neighbours. Anyone on the street who isn't Binny or his mother. The only people we can trust. My mother sits back down. I can tell that she is organising her thoughts. Her response will be calm and orderly, the exact opposite of my questions. She will start by telling me that it's part of living in a big city, that she grew up in a village, but in big cities you cannot trust people in the same way. But she doesn't say that. She says, Shif, your father isn't dead. So again, a really wonderful example of the way that dialogue takes the story forward, gives us some background, gives us a sense of the characters involved. We get a sense of Shif's agitation and his anger, as well as his mother's desire to keep everything very quiet. And then finally, also from Boy 87, at dusk, Almaz's father returns, and then Jane's husband. After Almaz's father has drunk some tea, I ask if I can speak with him. He beckons me over with an impatient wave of his hand. I'm Mesfin. How's your ankle healing? It's a bit better. Maybe soon I'll be able to work a little. You could, he says, although it's better if people don't notice you're here at all. So you have no money? I have no money to buy food. My family can send money for traveling, though. He nods. My wife has a kind heart. You're lucky she found you first. I'm very grateful, I say. It's kind of you to let me stay here with you. It's kind of you to let me stay here when you have little space to share. but I want to travel to Europe as soon as I can. Can you help me find someone who can take me north? I can find you a smuggler. The trick is to find a smuggler who isn't going to cheat you, sell you, or kill you. Mesfin looks at me as if he's waiting for me to agree. I've made contact with someone who says he can arrange for us to go. He gestures around the room. It's safer to travel together. Who has the money for you? My mother. Have you spoken to her since you left? No. How do you know the military hasn't put her in prison? I don't know. I realize that I sound stupid. I have no phone, Mesfin replies. He's quiet for a minute. I'm going to see my contact tomorrow evening. I'll introduce you to him. He'll give you his phone to call for the money. We'll be leaving in 2 weeks by truck. If you can afford it, I recommend you do the same. The chances of you arriving in one piece or arriving at all are much better if you don't have to walk across the desert. The truck will take you across the border to the port. Then you'll have to wait for a boat. I nod. Thank you. So that, again, another wonderful example of dialogue. Very few tags, as I read through. We don't know the name of the person that was talking to Almaz's father, but we know that he's not the same person, or she's not the same person that's talking to the adult. There's a very different energy between the two, and there's a lot of information being shared here through the dialogue. We're finding out about smugglers. We're finding out that it's safer to travel in a group. We're finding out that this child is on their own, that they have to get the money from their mother. So there's a lot of information here, and it shows how dialogue can work really hard to progress a story. I think we have to trust readers to know who they're reading about and what they're reading about. And you as writers also have to really work to develop character. So it's very clear when people are speaking that two different people are speaking, and that they're that they have different roles in the relationship. But I definitely urge people to drop tags on conversation, because often it just slows it down. And certainly when there's long stretches of conversation and we have he said, she said, he said, she said, I think the reader just starts to skip over that. It's not essential. Right, so let me find my writing exercises for dialogue. So there's a few choices here. I'll read them through carefully. Write a conversation between two friends who are trying to agree on how to keep a secret about a broken glass vase. Write a conversation between two friends who are trying to agree on how to keep a secret about a broken glass vase. Write a conversation between a brother and a sister when one is bragging about being the fastest runner. Write a conversation between a brother and a sister when one is bragging about being the fastest runner. Write a conversation between three people who are trying to persuade one of the group to play truant from school. Write a conversation between three people who are trying to persuade one of the group to play truant from school. Write a conversation between two people at the bus stop, watching two people on the other side of the road try to tie up a goat. Write a conversation between two people at the bus stop, watching two people on the other side of the road trying to tie up a goat. And finally, write a conversation between two people where one is telling the other about an incident in school when a teacher told off one of their mutual friends. Write a conversation between two people where one is telling the other about an incident in school when a teacher told off one of their mutual friends. So as before, we'll take 10 minutes to do this exercise, and then we will reconvene for 5 minutes before the lunch break. Okay, everybody. I think I'd love to hear some of your writing, if anybody would like to read. Are there any volunteers for reading their pieces of writing just now? Perfect.
Okay, the shop was called Everything and Nothing. It sat in the middle of nowhere. It existed, but it didn't. It opened its doors only to people who were desperate for it. The first time Ejiofor went there, he nearly peed in his pants. It was on an extremely hot day in the middle of Balogun Market. His skin was frying under the scorching sun, and he had forgotten his umbrella at home. Desperate to get away from the sun, he prayed for cold air. And just like that, 1 second he was frying under the sun, and the next he was in a dark, cold room. The first thing he noticed was rows and rows of the strangest things: eyeballs, hair, animal limbs, peeled skin, dried rats. Second thing he noticed was the strange scent of lemongrass. It seemed to fill the room, attacking his eyes and nostrils until they watered. He muffled the cough that rose to his throat. He didn't want anyone to notice his presence. Then from behind him, he heard a voice. Welcome to the shop of everything and nothing. And yes, I can change your skin color.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was great. Does anybody have any comments on that? What do people feel about that piece of writing? But I'd just like to say that I think you've done a wonderful job there. You've brought in the description of the place, as well as how that makes the child or the young person feel. And there's a real sense of intrigue about what's going on in the space, in the shop that sells everything, which is clearly unusual. There's clearly things going on in there that it's not where you go to buy bread. So thank you so much. That was really fantastic. Without a character that we care about, it's really hard to care about a book. I think if we can't engage with character, we're going to find it very hard to engage with the book. And how do we do that? How do we create our characters? So I think one of the first things to remember is that every character is unique, and a well-drawn character will help create a well-drawn plot, and that compelling characters that we really care about are essential to making the plot important to us. And of course, a book's packed full of characters. There's not only the main character, there's antagonists, there's secondary characters, there's characters who support the main character, there's characters who challenge the main character. But on the whole, we need a central character that for one reason or another, we care about them. And there are occasionally books in which the main character is a flawed character, a character who has real problems and issues. But generally, the main characters of books, and particularly, I think the main characters of children's books, are people that we really want to champion, and people that we really want to care for. So how do we make our characters compelling? Well, for one thing, we have to remember that characters are not all one thing or another. Any character who is entirely good and always makes the right choices and always says nice things about people and always behaves themselves is possibly not going to be the kind of character that who's going to really hold our attention. And we want to see characters travel through a learning arc. We want to see characters develop. We want to see characters go on a journey, an emotional and physical journey, in the same way that we do in life, with challenges and hurdles that we need to get over. And in the hope that at the end, the characters are going to be more engaging than they were, more believable. So characters need to engage our emotions, and the author needs to reveal their humanity. They need to show the character caring and being cared for. Characters need history, they need relationships, they need things that matter to them, that they're questing for. You need to build into your writing that sense of a whole human being. Characters often need emotional conflict. And if we think about things like star-crossed lovers or Harry Potter and the desire to deal with Voldemort in order, in part, to avenge the death of his parents, emotional conflict makes us curious about what a character will do. And it's very important to have an element of emotional conflict. And that can be an argument with a school friend, it can be sibling rivalry, it can be issues to do with a pet. It doesn't have to be huge, great, big events like Harry Potter and Voldemort, but any emotional conflict adds to the depth and empathy that we feel for characters. So you have to make your character want something badly enough to step outside their comfort zone and go on an adventure. If they don't want something, they're not going to act to make any changes. They're not going to try and do anything differently. They're going to carry on living their life in the way that they've always lived it. And that doesn't make for a wildly exciting novel either. You have to make them motivated. They must keep looking for it or trying to achieve it, even when the situation goes from bad to worse. And where you have to think about where these motivations and desires for something come from. Do they come from the distinct natures of the characters? Are the characters is your character naturally brave? Is your character given a quest that they have to go on? Is your character trying to save their family? Is your character trying to heal a rift with somebody at school? What's the thing why do they want this thing so badly? What is the thing that forces them to take part in their adventure? And make them motivated. They must keep looking for it and trying to achieve it. Even, I think I've said this, even when the situation goes from bad to worse. Think about, do think about that all the time. And it's a really good idea to make a list of things about your character. Think about your character emotionally as well as physically. So what can go wrong when creating a character? Well, one of the big things I think that happens is that the writer is too keen that we like the character. Characters should actually be well-rounded, warts and all types of people. Sometimes having things about a character that we don't particularly like makes them more plausible and believable. A child who's quite stubborn, who learns through experience that stubbornness isn't very good for them, will make us care much more for that child, because we'll see the character go through a learning process. Your character doesn't only need good characteristics to be gripping. They need to be real people, and none of us are all perfect. Taking characters out of their comfort zones and showing them getting tired, afraid, irritable, anxious, jealous will show them in a more fully rounded context. Think about writing in scenes that will let us see the character in those situations. We need to get a sense of the internal life of a character. Showing characters' reactions to things helps build a sense of that character. If they're caught doing something they shouldn't, we need to know how they feel. If they're caught sneaking back late from a party after being categorically told to be back by 9 p.m, how do they feel about it and why? They might feel it was worth the trouble they were in because they had a great time, or they might feel mortified that they had upset their parents. If someone gets a detention for getting in a fight, they might feel horrible that they have blotted an otherwise blemish-free school record, or they might feel really proud that they stood up to defend someone who was being bullied. So think about behavior think about things that the character does as ways for us to get an insight into the character. It's really good to try and create enigmatic characters who are exciting to our curiosity. And this is not done by underdrawing them. It's not done by failing to flesh out their description. It's done by creating conundrums. So if you're creating a character who's not to be entirely trusted, who's involved in something duplicitous, think about putting in dates that don't add up. Think about them telling small lies or big lies. Think about ways in which you can create a sense of them as somebody not to be trusted. Don't, again, back to show, don't tell. Don't tell us this character isn't to be trusted. Show us them doing something that we as readers immediately know isn't true. And then you've immediately created a doubt in the reader's mind about that character. And that's a really good thing to do. So as an important element of a book is not only the main character, the hero, but it's the antagonist. And they're really, really important for creating well-rounded, believable stories. But they shouldn't just be there as foils to the hero of the piece. They too need context. They need family, they need friends, they need conundrums, they need an internal life. They need to have all of the things that your main character has. So, for example, a baddie, an antagonist, isn't all bad. Generally, they also love their mothers and are loved by their mothers. They generally also have friendship groups that they want to take care of. They generally have things that they care about that soften their edges, but it's just in conflict with your main character if they exist just in conflict with your main character, and as a very kind of flat, not very three-dimensional fleshing out of a person, then they become, they kind of lessen the, they lessen the whole picture of the novel and start to make it feel less plausible. So it's not simply enough to be there to act in opposition to your hero. Those characters need to be as well-rounded and well-realized as your protagonist. So when you think about your characters, make lists. Think about them as real people. Write descriptions of them. Write lists of things that they like and don't like. What do they look like? How do they wear their clothes? What's their room like? What are their relationships like? What do they like to eat? Where would they sit in class? How would they behave if the bus was very crowded? What are the things that make them frightened? What are the things that they like to do in their spare time? What are the books they like to read? Think about them as real people and compose lists of attributes for all your main characters. Which is often very important in books for young readers, you're creating a friendship group and you have 3 or 4 main characters who are acting together to drive the narrative of the story. Create different profiles for each character and make sure those profiles make them seem like different people. It's often very easy to create 4 characters who are all very similar. They're just slight tweaks on one another. But think about them as each as really unique people. And why are they friends? What makes them stick together as a group? It's also important to think of your characters' backstories. What's happened to them? What are their lives like? Where do they live? What are their parents like? What do their parents do for a living? What's their access to education? What's if they're girls? How do they function in the world? If they're boys, what's their attitude to superheroes and you know, just really don't hold back in building this character sketch for yourself. Every story is made up of both events and characters, and a story happens because a pattern is interrupted. If you are writing about a day that is like any other day, it is most likely a routine, not an exciting story. So if you bear in mind that what makes an exciting story is something that happens that's challenging, out of the ordinary, different, unusual, you're coming coming to the story with a positive attitude about plot. So what I want to do is look at story structure, story ideas, and backstory and the way that they can all inform a good plot, and try to find ways of helping you focus on that. Now, plot works best when it's twinned with a good theme. So if you think the difference between plot and theme, plot is the action, the beginning, the middle, and end, the sequencing of events in an exciting way that grips you as a reader. And theme, the theme of your book is at a deeper level what the book is about. So while the book may be about a bank heist, the theme of that book could be about friendship, capitalism, exploitation of poor people, and so on and so forth. The theme is the sort of the deeper meaning of the book, the underlying story which informs the action, that the action balances and gives us a window into understanding the author's idea around themes. So I'm going to try and look at both plot and theme. So there's a school of thought that says that there's 7 basic types of plot, and that any story in the world you can pick will fit into one of these 7 themes. So there's tragedy, and in a tragedy, your main character should undergo a major change of fortune, almost always from good to bad, happy to sad. Tragic characters have to suffer. There's comedy. In comedy, even though your characters have defects, their defects should never wind up being painful or destructive. Comic characters make it through unscathed, even if they have a bumpy ride on the way through. There's the hero's journey. Number 3, hero's journey. In a hero's journey, the hero of a story must undergo 2 things: recognition and reversal of a situation. Something that has to happen from the outside that inspires the hero in a way that he didn't realize before. Then he has to undertake a quest to solve the situation. There's rags to riches. The most obvious of those stories is Cinderella. A classic fairy tale follows a simple rags to riches plot. The protagonist is downtrodden, impoverished, or otherwise struggling, and through a series of events, either magical, like the cases like the novel of the Harry Potter novels, or more realistic, like Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, they achieve success. This type of plot, more often than not, features a happy ending. There's Rebirth, and the Rebirth style of plot follows a character's transformation from bad to good. The character will frequently have a tragic past that informs their current negative view of life. However, a series of events will help them see the light. For example, Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, Beauty and the Beast in Beauty and the Beast. And number 6, overcoming the monster, otherwise known as the good versus evil plot. This type of story features a protagonist who's good fighting an antagonist who's evil. The protagonist can either be a singular character or a group united in their mission. For example, the antagonist is generally a big bad evil like Darth Vader in Star Wars, who continuously throws obstacles in the protagonist's way until the final battle. And in fact, Harry Potter can fall into the category of overcoming the monster as well. And I think it's really important to know that your novel can include several of these story types. It doesn't have to just be one. Sometimes overcoming the monster and rags to riches complement each other really nicely, or the hero's journey and overcoming the monster complement each other really nicely. So you can weave in various elements from the different strands. And number 7, there's voyage and return. This plot is a simple point A to point B and back to point A plot. The protagonist sets off on a journey, only return to his or her starting point having gained wisdom and experience, and sometimes treasure too. So, how to outline a story plot. Some writers come to their stories, writing their stories with the plot fully worked out. They know what's going to happen. They know the beginning, the middle, and the end, and they know how each part links together. Other writers have an idea for a character and a germ of an idea, and they start writing, and the plot evolves as they write and as they edit. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. But if you want to come to your story with your plot quite worked out, one way to do it is to think about the three parts, the beginning, the middle, and end. And remember that each part has to have its own purpose and challenge. There has to be, within the story arc, the beginning, middle, and end, each chapter itself has to be quite a satisfying read and deliver something satisfying to the reader, so that something happens in that chapter that either piques their interest for the next chapter or makes them feel that something's been resolved in a way that they want to go on and find out what's going to happen next. But the chapters, in a way, should work as sort of mini stories within the big story. Your audience should be able to watch your story, read your story, without being distracted with wondering what happened before the story started and what more happened after it ended. Somehow you have to contain your story world in a way, I think, that leaves the reader satisfied and with enough of a sense of where those characters have come from to have had complete empathy for them. The beginning of your novel has to accomplish a lot. It must introduce the hero, the villain, and the world of the story, as well as the story's dramatic question. And it must do this with enough energy to grab your reader's interest straight away. A prologue can be useful for seizing the reader's attention. Opening lines are really, really important. I think we've all opened a book and read the first page and thought, no, I don't really fancy this. And there has to be some way of having, from that very, very first page, a way of gripping your readers and making them want to find out what's going on. And a very common mistake, I think, on the first page is to feel that you have to give your readers, that word exposition again, background, information about who they're reading about. You don't. You have to drop your readers right into the middle of the action and have them intrigued enough by the characters to want to know what happens next. In the end, with reading a book, what's most important is wanting to turn the page and find out what happens next, not wanting to have a full picture of where those characters came from to get there. That's less important. The middle of the book, and your job during the middle of the story, is to make the hero's quest as difficult as possible, so that at every moment it seems less likely that the hero will triumph. You must raise the stakes along the way and create obstacles of ever-increasing intensity while keeping your eye firmly fixed on your conclusion. The different plot points can include the basic plot plus various subplots, and the main plot of the story always has to build up to the resolution. And then the end. The end of your story answers the dramatic question, which already has your ending hidden within it. For example, if your question is, will Ahab catch the whale? Then your story's finale will often be will be the moment when he does. Often tension evaporates in the middle of a novel, so it's a good idea to write your ending first. It may not be perfect, and you can always change it later, but it's useful to know the climax to which your characters are heading. Having that destination will help you keep focused during the middle, often called the middle muddle part of writing a book. So whatever situation your hero is facing at the start of the middle section, this should become worse. If the story itself falters, remember that the stakes have to grow increasingly higher for your protagonist. Throw obstacles into their path, even if you don't know how they will surmount them. Sometimes forcing your characters into a corner can stimulate your problem-solving skills. So create physical danger, create secondary characters who bring new tension to the story, introduce new problems, give a character a complicated history or situation, create obstacles for your hero, complicate things, remind the reader of the stakes, find ways to keep your protagonists moving from one location to another, add time pressure like a ticking bomb. I just read a very good book. I run a book club once a month for people who read adult books, and I read a very good crime novel over the last couple of days, which we're discussing in our next book club meeting. And what I realized when I finished it, when I closed the book, that one of the reasons I found it so breathlessly exciting was that the action of the novel all took place in 2 days. And at the same time, the author has so brilliantly brought in a lot of backstory by introducing characters who know the main characters within the book. But everything that happens in that book happens between the morning of one day and 2 days later, the end of the day, 2 days later. So time pressure is often a really good way of keeping the pace up. Also, it means that you don't have to create too much activity to cover a period of time. Often what happens if a novel's set over the course of a year or 2 years is that you suddenly have all these days and months that you have to fill. So keeping it tight in time can often really help the pace. So let me give you some examples of a plot generator idea. So the pattern of this story is that John and Mary are living happily in their split level bungalow. Based on this pattern, there are 4 different plots you could try. John and Mary are living happily in their split level bungalow, and then one day a strange green light is seen in the sky and a canister descends to earth right behind their house, and out of it comes a tentacled monster. What will they do? John and Mary are living happily in their split level bungalow, but then Mary begins to suspect that John has secret friends. Is he leading a secret life that his sister doesn't know anything about? So John and Mary are living happily in their split level bungalow. Same idea. Then John discovers that Mary is mysteriously absent during parts of the night and has developed an alarming tendency to sleep in the bathtub with all the curtains drawn. What has happened? What are those strange white fangs that have appeared? Could it be that Mary is a vampire? What is John going to do? And what about their other sisters and brothers? Have they inherited this tendency or not? John and Mary are living happily in their split level bungalow, but their parents have gone away and they don't know where they are, and they're rapidly running out of money. What are they going to do? I know, says John. Let's rob a bank. So as you can see, the basic idea is 2 people together in a house, siblings. And if we just said, if your story was just about these 2 children being together in this house and everything carrying on as normal, it possibly wouldn't be as exciting as introducing aliens, or John having a secret life and sneaking off to play with friends in the middle of without his sister Mary, or Mary potentially being a vampire, or indeed the pair of them hatching a plan to rob a bank because their parents have gone missing and they're running out of money. So plot is hugely important. And I felt when I read everybody's submissions to take part in this workshop, that your writing, your descriptive writing, your ideas were all really, really strong, and that thinking about plot would be something that would be really advantageous to everybody in terms of developing those ideas and taking them on, remembering that what we have to do is engage readers and really ensure that we have them gripped and wanting to know what's going to happen next. Plot involves jeopardy. A story without jeopardy, a story without the potential for things going wrong, a story without threat, danger, worry is possibly not very exciting. Even comic stories, really hilariously funny stories, usually involve misunderstanding, miscommunication, people not understanding each other, messages going awry, and while it's funny, we laugh aloud at it, we're also really concerned about the characters, that people aren't going to meet up because this message wasn't delivered or something got lost. And you've got to think very hard about how you help your readers stay engaged with your stories by making sure that the plot is really well paced. And as I said earlier on when I started talking about plot, not only is there the big plot of the novel, the big events of the novel, as we discussed here with Tom and Mary, each chapter has to contain within it the same structure of beginning, middle, and end, so that the reader is propelled forward, constantly driven forward to keep reading. And when you're writing, do think about what your themes are. And themes are most effective when they're subtly explored, I think. If a novel is very didactic, very driven to discuss a theme, it can often leave readers feeling that they're being lectured, or that they're being given, that they're not being given too much choice and not being allowed to think through their own opinions about something. What's really interesting in the best books and the best films and the best stories is when the theme is discussed in a way by the author, by the creator, that allows the reader to make up their own mind, when there's a certain amount of dilemma, when there's a certain amount of ambiguity about what the author feels, so that the reader themselves can use their own critical thinking to decide. And themes, common themes in children's literature: family, friendship, growing up, finding your own voice, being brave, being yourself. Then there's also big political themes that we can explore in literature. There's, at the moment, there's a lot being written about climate change. There's a lot of issues about political issues that are affecting us all: homelessness, poverty, gender issues. All of those things can be explored in reading, in literature for young people. And I think it's a really wonderful time in the world of literature for young people, because suddenly it's as if there's no doors closed on any subject. We can talk about anything we want in books for young people. And young people have a great curiosity about the world and a great concern about the world. And reading fiction is a lovely way to explore all of those issues without necessarily exposing ourselves to the dangers of them as well. There's a school of thought about literature that it's a window and a mirror, and that as a window it allows us to look through and see the lives of other people and gain an understanding of the lives of other people. And as a mirror, it allows us to look at ourselves and our own roles and our own participation in events. So big books like The Hunger Games, which on one level people could say is a fantasy novel about a dystopian society in which people have to fight in order to survive. But on a deeper level, it's about friendship, it's about responsibility, it's about the way in which society can try to oppress young people and young people can resist. So there's a lot in all sorts of books, and thinking about your themes is a very important thing. So some writing exercises. Now, what I'm going to try to do is copy these onto a slide so that when you're working, you can see them. But I'm going to talk through them first. So now we've spoken a little bit about plot. I want people to try their hand at writing their own stories with the following exercise. And I'm going to give 15 minutes for this exercise because plot is so complicated and it does take a little bit longer, clearly, a lot longer than 15 minutes, but it takes a little bit longer perhaps than the other exercises to do. So write down, number one, write down 10 events that might spark a story. They don't have to be big. These could be things that happen to you or someone you know, or items that you read about in the news. But write down 10 events that could spark a story. So just sitting here and looking out of my window, I could say, there's a cat in the garden. It's not our cat, and it comes into the house, and I've got a dog. That's one event that could spark a story for me. The there's a child that plays on a balcony in a block of flats behind my house, and I can see the child playing, and I could think about what he does all day. He's there all day, every day, and through the literally barely gone out, and I'd like to think about his life and why is he in that house, and why is he sheltering. So think about those big things, and then think about 10 classic stories, fairy tales, folk tales, myths, or maybe family stories that were passed down to you, that just make a list of their titles or their, the basics of their story, and think about ways in which you might update them, change them, modernize them, or indeed historicalize them if they're contemporary stories. Because often we get inspiration from other people's stories, other stories that have been written. There's a big vogue at the moment, has been for some time, in children's literature where people take fairy tales like Sleeping Beauty or Rapunzel, and they write it in a new setting, and they maybe move the characters to a contemporary town, a contemporary situation, but use the structure of that fairy tale in order to write their own story. Now, once you've got your 3 lists, 10 events, 10 characters, and 10 classic stories, you take one item from each list, one event, one character, and one shell, and think about how you agree. You drop a character of your own old folk tale, and how does your personal event permit you to play with the foundational folk tale? So you can see that you can gain inspiration for stories from all sorts of places. I think the thing about writing is that we have to take our inspiration from everywhere and from everything. And I've spoken to authors, and I've said to them, where did you get that idea for the story? And they said, oh, I overheard a conversation on the bus, or I remembered a game I used to play when I was little, or when I was reading this novel, there was a character I really liked in that novel, and I wanted to know what happened to her. So I decided I would write about her. Or indeed, I wanted to tell the backstory of Anne Boleyn as a child. So I think what I encourage everybody to really think hard about is the way that setting, character, dialogue, plot all work together to make a strong and compelling book. I'd love to hear some people's lists, actually, and maybe we can have a quick chat through some of the ideas that come up.
I could read one.
Great, thank
Mine
you.
is incomplete, but my first one is.
Good.
So the one for events, when we got robbed in my grandma's house 20 years ago.
Great, I'm immediately interested.
When Chris is my husband's friend, when himself and his friends tried to roll their dad's car out of their house in the night, and after some time they turned on the torch and they noticed that their dad was pushing the car with them. They were trying to leave the house to go for a party. And so they were going to roll the car out of the house so that the dad won't see them. And after some time, they realized that he was just there pushing the car along with them. And then I have a tree split for the third one and falls on a bus. For number 4, I have a boy learns how to fly. So flies for the first time. For the 5th one, I have a girl's first kiss. For the 6th one, I have a dog eating a car. For the 7th one, I have inanimate objects in a room suddenly come to life.
Well, immediately you've introduced jeopardy to your story by saying that he's somebody who succumbs to peer pressure, because when we read about people who succumb to pressure, we, in our heads and hearts, are screaming for them to resist. Mm-hmm. But they don't resist, and they fall under the pressure. And then, of course, what transpires is what makes the story exciting, because it is. I mean, I can certainly imagine if I imagined your husband telling that story to people, that people would laugh.
Yes, a lot actually.
Yeah, so it is hilarious to think that you're trying to sneak out of your father's house and your father's helping you sneak. So actually, it's a really lovely comic story. So again, as I said, building ideas of plot, building ideas of story building. You've got several things happening here. So the next thing is something called Spilled Water by a woman called Sally Grindley. It's set in the 1980s in China, and it's a book about child labour. All the pleasure in the meal evaporated under Mrs. Chen's critical eye. I had never eaten better, but I had never enjoyed a meal less. I ate as much as I was able, not daring to leave too much in case it was taken as an insult, then smiled timidly and I said, "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, that was delicious." "We'll soon tidy up your manners," Mrs. Chen replied, smiling back. "Now, when you've finished washing up, I'll take you to have your hair cut and buy you some new clothes." With that, she sailed out of the kitchen, leaving me to discover for myself the sink piled high with dirty pans and dishes. I wasn't used to a tap that delivered hot water, so immediately scolded myself. Nor had I come across something called washing up liquid, which I found by the sink. I read the label and, as directed, squirted some into the running water. Then I gave a few extra squirts in case I hadn't put in enough. I watched with amusement as the bubbles appeared, then horror as they frothed over the side of the sink onto the floor. I grabbed a cloth and tried to wipe up the mess, but water began to overflow as well because I had forgotten to turn off the tap. Some of the pans were very sticky. I scrubbed them hard, then left them to drain while I attacked the dishes which, when clean, I balanced on top of the pans. One of them slid to the floor with a resounding crash which summoned Mrs. Chen. She found me rooted, panic-stricken to the spot, surrounded by hundreds of pieces of broken porcelain and rivulets of water. She looked at me, at the porcelain scattered all over the floor, and beyond me to the pile of dishes and pans. She picked up a pan, inspected it, put it down, picked up the cloth, which I had used to wipe the floor, inspected it, put it down. "The cloth is for drying dishes," she said. "I'm sorry," I muttered. "There is a broom in the cupboard. Be sure you sweep up every last splinter. We wouldn't want to cut ourselves, would we?" "No, Mrs. Chen," I mumbled. "The pans will need washing again," she continued. "It's early days. I'm sure you'll do better next time." "Yes, Mrs. Chen." I swept and swept the floor, every last millimetre of it, until I was sure Mrs. Chen could not possibly detect even the smallest fragment of porcelain. Then I scoured and scraped and scrubbed the pans before drying them carefully on a clean cloth. When Mrs. Chen reappeared, she didn't look at the floor or the pans, simply glanced at the table, pointed out a grain of rice, and asked me to wipe it up before we went out. As I stood beside her in the lift, smothered by the strength of her perfume, I felt thoroughly confused. I was in the most beautiful apartment with a room of my own, eating the most delicious food I'd ever tasted, going out to buy the first new clothes I'd had in years. Things could have been a million times worse, yet I was full of foreboding. It seemed I was there to do exactly as Mrs. Chen wished, to be shaped and moulded in whatever way she saw fit. I didn't want to have my hair cut. Why should I have my hair cut just because Mrs. Chen said I had to? But I didn't defy her. Her smile was barbed. It fell to touch her eyes, where I sensed pitilessness lurking not far below the surface. So I think that's a really wonderful example of first-person writing, where we get a real sense of the anxiety and fear and worry of the girl that's doing the cleaning, her lack of experience, her lack of knowledge, and the frostiness of Mrs. Chen, and this. Certainly at the last bit, when she's described as having a smile that doesn't touch her eyes, I think we get a sense that the girl's possibly in a very unhappy and difficult situation. This author also uses language very carefully. I think listening to her, I hope that you had a sense of her incredible control of the use of language, and how she also uses repetition quite well to when wanting to emphasize a point, she'll repeat something. But mostly it's very spare language, it's very sparse, and it's very, very clear. So there's not really any big describing words. There's no hyperbole. There's not masses of magnificent and scary and noisily, and those words they're not there. It's when she breaks the plate, it's the smallest fragments of porcelain. So you know that there's things have been smashed. And by using language so carefully, she's actually using her voice very loudly. And then finally, back to this author, Celia Rees, and a book called Witch Child, which we have read from already today. Now, the changing motion of the carriage woke me. I must have fallen asleep, my senses dulled by exhaustion and lulled by the constant swaying movement. I started awake to the sound of horses' hooves clattering on cobblestones. Outside, the day had darkened. I judged it to be late afternoon, although tall buildings crowded out the sky. The coachman called and the horses neighed in answer as the coach turned into a wide inn yard. Where are we? My companion still said nothing, merely smiled beneath her veil and put one gloved finger to her lips. The coach had come to a halt. I drew back the leather curtain a little more to peer out. The coachman opened the door for my companion to step down. People came running, an ostler to hold the horses, the innkeeper bowing, his wife dropping curtsies. Their eyes widened somewhat as my companion turned back to help me out, but they said nothing, as it was as if they were expected. I stumbled slightly, my legs stiff from sitting so long and my head still rocking with the motion of the coach. The hand on mine tightened and did not let go. So that is a historical novel, and I think we get a real sense of it being some time ago, from things like the discussion of the horse's hooves on cobblestones and words like ostler. Now, I'm not entirely sure what an ostler is, but it's something I would go and, as a reader, I would go and find out what it was. And I would know that it was something from the past. We don't have ostlers still working today. And that again, the author using her voice in the way she uses words to describe a time and place. So let's have a look. The writing exercise. What I'd like everybody to do is to do some writing now, and to try to find ways to explore the same piece of writing through different voices. Write about a walk to school in the first person, and then write about the same walk in the third person. So think about what the character passes on the street, what the weather's like, whether it's a small village or a big city, whether it's a long walk through the countryside or a short walk along a busy road, or think about that journey and think about it, first of all, as told in the first person and then told in the third person. Write about an argument between two people. One is very angry and aggressive, and the other is afraid. So we want to see this argument described, please, in the third person rather than in the first person. So show us it from outside, not from the perspective of one of the characters, but from somebody looking at them as if you yourself are the viewer of that argument. Write about a day at the beach from the point of view of a child who is very happy, and then from the point of view of a child who is afraid of the water. So you can choose whether you write that in the first person or the third person. So write about a day at the beach from the point of view of a child who is very happy, and then from the point of view of a child who is afraid of the water. And then finally, the fourth choice is a child is late home from school. Describe the return home from the point of view of a child who was lost, and then from the point of view of a child who had gone off to play with school friends and had lost track of time. So when talking about voice, we talked about the words that are used, the length of sentences, the way that individuals express themselves, the characters express themselves. Think about all those things when you choose which piece you want to write, and think about how those things, those elements of description and control of the vocabulary that you use will make for a different voice in the two pieces of writing. I think I can see a hand waving in the Lagos group. Can we invite? So before you start reading, will you tell us which piece you're reading, which piece you've written to?
Okay, it's that part of to write about a day at the beach from the point of view of a child that is happy, and from the point of view of a child who is afraid of the water. I actually did not get to the second part. I wanted to put it together somehow, but from the point of view of a child who is happy, and then from the point of view of a child who is afraid of water. I wanted to put the two together, but because of the time, I couldn't get to the second one. But I'll just read what I have here. It says, I looked at my right side, at Toby. Both of us were in the back seat of the car, my father's new official car, heading towards the beach. Yes, the beach. I can't wait to get there. I could almost smell the mistiness of water as we were going. I excitedly clung to the headrest of my mom's seat, barely keeping myself calm as we drove in close to the beach. I sniffed. I purely love the smell. There is a... Oh my, what did I put here? There is a ting of murkiness, but it's okay by me. I dashed out as the car came to a stop, ignoring the anxious shouts of my parents. Junior, Junior, they shouted. I pretended not to hear them as I ran excitedly to the place where I saw a group of children by the side of the beach, my peers. I quickly ran into the side of the water, rushing in, following their lead, under the strict watch of a steel-faced enormous woman. I laughed as the water hit my face, feeling sure this must be how my dad feels when he has taken 4 glasses of that drink he kept locked in his locker. My laughter sure sounded like his. Ha 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 ha. I ran towards my parents, noticing Toby still was steps behind. Toby, Toby, I shouted, come here. Leave me, he replied. I saved him a glance, but quickly returned to my courts. No one is going to stop my fun. Ha 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 ha. I laughed again. Maybe I should go and take a sip of that drink. Then I'll be able to know how this actually feels.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that. So do we have any comments on what we've just heard in terms of a child enjoying and excited about her day or his day at the beach? I'm going to ask you, if you have time, if you're interested in doing this, to write your description again, but this time don't have your child say they're happy, they're excited, they can't wait. Show us how your child is excited. So, for example, what does a child do in the car when it's excited? Does it jump up and down, look out of the window a lot? Does it lean forward between the seats in front and say to its parents, are we there yet? Are we there? Are we going to be there soon? Does that how can you indicate excitement without using those words? And as an exercise, I think sometimes it's really helpful to try to show emotion without using the words associated with that emotion. And thank you so much. It was a really, really excellent piece of writing. So does anybody else want to read anything? No? I'm not sure if there's people. Oh, great.
All right.
Thank you.
I wrote about my walk to school from the first person's point of view and from the third person's point of view.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Amen, I muttered mechanically to my mom's prayers as I shut the door behind me, and with a sigh of relief, I took the first stairs down that led out of my home, the best part of my day. It was a 15-minute walk from my home to school, but it took me about 30 minutes. This was because I enjoyed walks. Being the first child of 5 children, I quickly learned I was next in line with all the responsibilities after mommy and daddy. So these 30 minutes were the only time I had by myself. Here, it did not matter if I walked fast or slow, if I jumped or spun. I had no one watching me to criticize or mimic me. It felt so at peace walking, swigging my lunchbox to match every step of my feet, stopping by the cake vendor to see her display and design of the day, whistling with the birds as if to match their rhythm. I had no care in the world. And as the gate of my school loomed ahead of me, as the gate of my school loomed ahead of me with its popular slogan, knowledge is wealth, I would feel my bubble burst out and give way to the expectations and standards I needed to meet with everyone around me. Then the third person. Amen, Sarah muttered under her breath as she closed the door behind her and started down through the stairs that led out of her house. Her lips parted to let out a sigh and a release of a smile. And just like watching a flower bloom, the smile widened with each step till it was in full bloom. Sarah was a happy child, or one that really enjoyed walks. She would say a nice, happy good morning, sir, or good morning, ma, to every passing person, and would stop by to look longingly, a big cherry smile on her face, through the glass display of the bakery shop every morning. You could hear her whisper tunelessly out loud and swing her pink lunchbox excitedly as she made her way to school. Sorry, I couldn't finish.
Oh, thank you. That's a great start. Thank you very much. I think that it gives us an idea of how different it feels to read something in the first person and the third person. You explored that really well. Thank you. Okay. So voice, as I think, we're really just scratching the surface here today, but voice is something to really pay attention to. So the next thing I want to talk about with you is self-awareness about our writing, how to be thoughtful about what we're writing, and also how to improve our writing generally. So I think we'll start with talking a little bit about self-editing. Self-editing is really the process of writing, because at whatever point you put your pen to paper or your fingers to the keyboard, you're making choices about what you want to put on the page. And that is the process of editing. And until you have edited to your satisfaction the things that you've written, you aren't going to want to share the things you've written with anybody else. So this self-editing is absolutely core to the process of writing. You have to start writing. You have to write a first draft. If you agonize over every sentence, your prose is going to feel quite stiff. It's good to think about how to make your writing flow. But fear of the first page is something that is often debilitating in many ways. And you don't have to get the first page right then the second page, absolutely right, then the third page, absolutely right. What you have to do is get a first draft. By the end of the book, you're probably going to be a better writer than you were at the start of the book. At the end of the fourth draft of your book, you are undoubtedly going to be a better writer than you were at the start of your first draft of your book. So don't feel that you have to get it right first time. This really is a process. Writing is a process, and it takes time and effort and attention and self-correction all the way along. So things that you need to think about how and where you best write. How do you work best, and what's the best place for you to be when you are writing? Find somewhere comfortable, find somewhere quiet, find somewhere that you're not going to be interrupted by your thoughts and concerns about the other things you have to do. You have to put time aside to write, and you have to find time to write. And sometimes people say to me, oh, if I had more time, I'd write a book if I had more time. Well, none of us have more time. There's only the amount of time that we have. And many extremely successful writers, and I'm thinking of the adult author Jodi Picoult. I read an interview with her once. And when she first started writing, she had a day job. She was a single parent, and she had 2 daughters who were in school. And she got up at around 4:35 every morning and wrote for an hour or 2 hours before she had to get her children up, get them ready to go to school, before she went to work, before she came home, before she cooked the supper, before she did the washing, before she did all of those jobs that she had to do, had a good night's sleep, got back up at 4:30 the next morning to start all over again. And she really stuck with it. So it's not any more easy or more difficult for any of us. I mean, obviously somebody who's living in the lap of luxury and has huge private wealth can often find the time to write. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a better writer. So the other thing not to sweat is grammar. It's important, but it's not the be all and end all. Words like metaphor, simile, adverbs, verisimilitude, they're all labels that we put on things that we sort of know what to do when we're doing it. I often find myself, even as an editor, quite muddled by all the terms. But what I am always struck by and always impresses me is the sound of the sentences that somebody's constructed using the words that they've chosen to use. So think about yourself, think about your voice, think about what you want to say, and don't worry too much about the academic aspect of it. And similarly, spelling, don't worry too much about spelling, depending on what a character does. I mean, it's something I think we hear often, authors saying, oh, well, the character just came to life. The character came to me and came to life. And when they do that, of course, it means that the plot will change around the kinds of things that is exciting for that character to do. Once you've written your first draft and you've read through the book again, you might have a brilliant idea for how to solve a problem, the problem of something that's been missing in the story. And so as you start your second draft, you'll be able to iron all of those things out. It is important to have something of a plot in mind when you start a book, but it's also important to know that that plot can change, and that you can, with logical thinking and creative thinking, you can follow those changes and steer them and make them work. Characters can also change, and they can sometimes do something quite unexpected that comes to life as the story develops. Stories evolve and change as you write. We had a little conversation earlier on, and we were talking about characters and what characters might do, and you could see how, I think hopefully that conversation would give you a sense of how things develop through thinking and writing and conversation. It is a good idea to keep an eye on word count. There's, in publishing convention, there's a sort of rough word count for the age of books the age of the reader for a book. So a book for a 7 to 10-year-old would probably be no more than about 40,000 words. A book for a 10 to a 14-year-old would probably be around 65,000 words. And then a book for a 15-year-old, 15 plus, which is young adult, can be very much longer, up to about 100,000 words. So it's a good idea when you're writing to keep in mind your intended audience. What's the age of the person you're writing the story for? Children's books are very segmented in terms of the age of the child, the kind of the way in which a subject can be tackled for that age, and the length of book that goes with that age group. So do keep that in mind. And of course, if you're halfway through your book for 8 to 10-year-olds and you've already written 39,000 words and you still have half the story to tell, you perhaps might have to think a little bit about how to bring down that word count and concentrate that story. It may be that the story is a little bit flabby with lots of exposition and detail that isn't entirely relevant to the story, and it might be worth to really think about focusing on the plot at that stage. Do keep in mind your readership. Who are you writing for? Think about the audience, and what will help your book have a consistent tone will filter through with their dialogue, with the characters' dialogues and the theme, and the development of your story. So think about the age of the child, the subject matter, the age of the characters in the book, and the themes that you're exploring. And for an 8 to 10-year-old, if you want to explore themes of friendship, you might want to be writing about another group of children who are also around the age of 10 and the kind of adventures that could happen to them. Because it's important with children to write within their realm of experience, not to write outside their realm of experience. And it's also very important in children's books that children are the central characters, that adults in those books have supportive roles, then they don't have central roles, and that it's children who drive the narrative, and it's children who drive the story, and it's children whose actions and reactions are the things that we care about most. Things like chapter headings. At this stage, I really wouldn't give it a second thought. Just get your story down, write the first draft, and get it down onto a bit of paper, and then take a bit of time away from it. It's very hard to read anything that you've just written and to be objective about it. So take a bit of a break, and the length of that break is absolutely up to you, but you do need a bit of distance. And perhaps at this point, it's a good time to let someone else you trust read your book. I don't know if any of you are members of writers' groups, but writers' groups are a great way of getting objective feedback to a story. But look for someone who's willing to give you honest feedback and from whom you will take honest feedback. You have to have a trusting relationship with the person. But also remember, you don't have to act on every piece of feedback. Give yourself time to reflect. And if you don't choose to act on the feedback, have a good and logical reason why. So put it in a drawer, leave it for at least 6 weeks, forget about it, don't think about it. Think about other stories that you might want to write. And then after 6 weeks, get it back out and start again. Now, you may at this point realize that there's a huge plot flaw and that you need to start writing all over again. Or you might think, oh, this character is so great, they're so much fun, it'd be so much nicer if they had a bigger role, and you want to start changing and including more space for that character. But this is the time to start thinking about it. This is the big edit that often for many writers, the difference between the first draft and the second draft is like a completely different book. And be prepared to take that step, because the first draft is a really important process of thinking, logical thinking about your story that impacts later drafts. It doesn't have to be the one that you develop, and it can, what you write after the first draft can be very different, and that's fine. That's good too. So go through, flag anything in your reading that you think it isn't quite working. Think about plot twists that need to be corrected. Think about all the things that, characters, you might have a character who's really important for the first 3 chapters and then suddenly disappears. You might want to think about them, think about the pace, think about the structure. Are there parts of the book that are a bit slow? Are there parts that move too fast and they don't make sense for the reader? Think about the tension and action. Is there enough? Is there too much? I think when reading a book, as readers, I think we all know that we need periods in reading where things quieten down a little bit. We need a little bit of a breather before the action starts ratcheting up again. So think about that in your book, and if there's pacing issues that you might need to consider. You can also move chapters around if something happens that you think might be better if it happened later on. If you're telling a story in flashback, if your book is fantasy, is the logic of the fantasy world clear? To all of that, this is the time to start really thinking about it. Check your characters. Do they evolve? Are they plausible? Do you believe in them? Are the relationships in the book working well? Are the characters different enough? We talked a lot about that earlier on. How do we make the characters sound and feel different? Are they different enough, or do they mirror one another too closely? Are the antagonists as plausible as the protagonists? Is the protagonist too much of a goodie? Is the antagonist too much of a baddie? Think about all of that. And think about your voice. Check your voice. Is it consistent? Are you writing in the first person? And if so, are you really inhabiting that character? If you're writing multiple viewpoints, I meant to mention this a little bit earlier on, some books are told from the viewpoints of different first-person viewpoints of different characters. And it's quite common to see chapters alternate between different characters. I read from the book The Deep Blue Between earlier on by Aisha Haruna Atta, and that book is told alternate chapters, alternate twin sisters' points of views. Half of the story is set in Ghana and half of the story is set in Brazil, and we move back and forth between the sisters' stories, and the author has done a brilliant job of making both of them really unique and independent and standalone. So if you're doing things like that, be really critical with yourself. And the setting, look at the setting. Think about the world that you've created. Think about is the place you've created the real to you? Will it be real to other people? Can you imagine yourself walking down the street, sitting in that room? Can you feel the temperature? Do you know what it smells like? Do you know what the colors are like? Those are all really important things that you must think about and be self-critical about. Dialogue. Think about the dialogue, read it aloud, listen to yourself, keep working on it until it sounds authentic, and sounds authentic for your character, not just to your ear. And remember the tags, he said, she said. It's fine to have some, but you don't need to have it every time. And pretty soon it becomes quite invisible to you about where it is and when it isn't. Look out for words that you use. Editors call them crutch words. So there's certain words that authors will use repeatedly in a novel. And if you're working on a word processor, on a computer, you can do searches for certain words, and you can see how often certain words turn up again and again and again. And I think sometimes we need to get rid of those. And certainly a professional editor would be pointing those out for you pretty quickly. Be on the lookout for adverbs. For example, you might find that your characters suddenly do a lot of things. They don't suddenly have to do lots of things. They can just do lots of things. So watch out for things like that. you'll pick up your stylistic tics if you start to look at it very critically, and you'll see that you echo words from paragraph to paragraph, and you'll have phrases that you repeat, as we do in life. Show, don't tell. Now, I know I've mentioned that a couple of times, and that's a really hard one. And if you Google it, you'll find so many examples of it. But I've got one here which I think really does summarize the concept very well. So, he had never been on his own before. He felt sad and lonely. Or, he had never been on his own before. He turned the radio on, not to listen to the music, but just to hear someone else's voice. So I think that shows quite nicely how you can say it or you can show it. You've got to give your reader credit to work out what the character is feeling. It adds maturity to the story, and it recognizes that readers are really very sophisticated and very attuned to picking things up. And what are general things we can do to help improve our writing? I think the most important thing that we can do is to read and read and read and read and read and read and read a vast range of things. So read children's books, read history books, read adult crime books, read romantic fiction, read anything and everything that you can, because by reading you get to see and hear other authors' voices. You get to hear and see what other people are doing, and it can help you consider your own work a little bit more critically, which is a great thing to do. Read. You simply can't read too much, and I think that there's so much available to us now in terms of ebooks. We can always find anything that we want to read. And if you're working on a novel, about the participant whose one of her stories was about a northern girl refusing to marry an older man, research and find what other people have written on the subject and read their books. And it's not to copy them. It's not to copy other authors, but it's to get a sense of how those authors express themselves. So reading other people's books will help you be aware of what's around and what other people are doing, and it'll help you polish ideas for how you want to write your own story. And write and write and write. Keep a diary. Write short stories, do writing exercises, take part in competitions. I really, really believe that practice is the most important thing in terms of polishing one's skills. I totally believe that writers, their craft improves all the time. There's a very well-known writer called Neil Gaiman, who's written numerous extremely well-regarded books, both for children and adults. He's won numerous prizes. And Neil says that he's learnt to write by writing short stories. And he wrote short stories, and he just made them a little bit longer each time until he wrote a full novel. And actually, Neil publishes a lot of short stories as well as novels. And I think he's a great case in point for knowing that it's a process, and that you improve through applying your skills to the process. And be critical of yourself, and that can be really very, very hard to do. But I think one of the best ways of doing that, and it's that thing about put the story in the drawer for 6 weeks or however long, and then go back to it. But if you're writing a lot, you'll have a constant stream of things that you can be writing, reading, editing, improving, and you can be writing short stories, you can write poems, you can write narrative non-fiction, you can write free verse novels. the world is absolutely your oyster in the world of writing for young people, and there's a wonderful, wonderful range of things going on. Join groups. Since the pandemic, I think something extraordinary has happened, which is that people are getting together online to form writers groups, reading groups, book clubs, all sorts of wonderful ways of gathering nationally and internationally, and allowing us to share this wonderful world of literature. So start researching and find out where there's writers groups that you might be able to join. In the US and the UK, there's dozens of writers groups, probably hundreds actually, not dozens. And they're open. They want people to join. They want new voices. They want to be they want to support and be part of a supportive community. So find out, check things out, start researching and see where you can go with that. I think that the world is absolutely your oyster as somebody who wants to write for young people, and that your courage and your stamina are what are going to see you through and get you through to the other side of having a book that can be published. And you have to be prepared to put in a lot of work. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of thinking, and it takes a lot of hours, and it takes a lot of time. And as somebody who's worked with authors for 30 years, the one thing that I absolutely am certain of, the only thing I'm absolutely certain of, is that writing is really, really hard. And I'm constantly in awe of and have respect for people who write books, partly because I know how difficult it is, and partly because of the immense amount of pleasure I get from reading those stories. And I know that they're bringing pleasure to people all over the world who are able to enjoy stories written by people like you, sitting in your rooms, polishing your ideas. So we're now at more or less at 4 o'clock. And Deborah and I just wanted to talk. We wanted to ask if you had any questions for us. And we also wanted to talk a little bit about Accord Literary and tell you about our project and what we're doing, and encourage you to keep in touch with us about your writing. But first of all, does anybody have any questions for us, please, on what we've been talking about today?
Yeah. Take the mic.
Thank you.
All right. First of all, I want to thank you for such an enlightening workshop. It's been so very, very enlightening for me. I have learned a lot. I've gained a lot. I feel I can own the world, as you have put it, and just go and conquer. Thank you so much. So my first question, in line with what I've learned, and I'm not so sure, is, can you have two protagonists? Like most of the time, the protagonists are usually one, but can you have more than one protagonist? The second one is that we are supposed to make a list of all our characters to describe them. Will they evolve over the story? Like, would we describe them all at once, or their characters would evolve as we write our stories? Then, the third one is that we mentioned a lot about immersion, the plot lines. And right now you said that the research, we should do a lot of research, before we actually go on to write about a particular topic we're not sure about and all of that, especially about the plot lines. But the plot lines will be the same, I think, but I'm thinking if I was supposed to write a story about maybe romance, about romance, basically, the settings would have to be maybe Nigeria or Africa, so to speak, despite the fact that, of course, what happens during the degrees of relationship will still occur in my settings. I can't swap settings because this is where I grew up from, my background, so the behavior and the attitudes of my characters would be different from different people from all over the world. So I just want to make a clarification about that. So yeah, for now, I think that'll be all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Research and setting and plot development. I think it's easy to assume that we have a complete grasp of everything that's going on around us. But I'm absolutely certain that what happens in the house next door is different to what happens in this house. And so I have to use my imagination to see how people will live. I believe something that is very important to my belief system is that human beings all over the world share fundamental issues of humanity. We share an emotional range of love, concern, care, fears, friendship, family, desire for security. We feel joy in the same way. We feel sadness in the same way. And it doesn't matter if you're from Bhutan or if you're from Japan or if you're from North America, we all share those things. What's different is the cultural context in which we live. And that is different. And that isn't only the difference between Nigeria and Scotland, it's also the difference between the MacLean house and the Odedina house and the Smith house. There's cultural differences in those houses. So research and thinking about setting is about understanding, I think, understanding that and respecting those differences. And we can learn through reading, through watching films, through talking to people and listening to what people say to us and having a sense of that. Character lists. I think character lists are really, really helpful to start a novel. I think if you're thinking about your characters and wondering what they're like, having lists of things like he doesn't like boiled eggs and he's never remembers to brush his teeth and he's always late for school. All of those things help build up the picture of the character. But certainly if the character has been through an emotional and physical journey in the book, the chances are very likely that the character will change and that by the end of the book, he won't be late for school or he'll have given up school entirely. So the lists help you focus, but they're not lists to live and die by in terms of how you write your book. They just help you have a sense of who you're writing about. And in having a sense of who you're writing about, you're able to adapt and develop and grow that character like a real human being. Because somebody who's 7 and somebody who's 9, having been through an emotional and physical journey, they're going to be, the same child will be different in 2 years' time. And finally, multiple protagonists. I think the best books concern multiple protagonists because it's really hard to maintain your interest in just one person for the length of a narrative. You need other people around that character to help you have a sense of who that character is. And you need other people around that character to help develop the plot, develop jeopardy, to act as a mirror on the character. So yes, I think multiple protagonists are important in a book, but at the same time, how many is good? Is 3 good? Is 5 getting a bit complicated? Is 7 really hard to remember what everybody's doing all the time? Because you've got to remember, you've got to hold the reader's interest, and you've also got to hold the reader's ability to remember what's happening in the story. And sometimes if there's an awful lot of characters, it can be slightly harder to remember what's happening to one character when they're off page. And if you've got 7 characters and one character's off page for 6/7 of the book, it can be really hard to remember what's happening to them. And then that begs the point of whether or not that character is really valuable character to have in the book in the first place. So, you know, the thing about writing are that there's no rules to the rules. So we have all these rules about, oh, well, you know, this is best and this works, and think about voice and so on and so forth. But in the end, it's how you make those things your own and what you do with those rules that's most relevant. How are you going to invest in them in order to create the best fictional world for yourself as a writer? So you kind of want to know them, but at the same time, you want to be able to play with them and manipulate them and make them your own. So there we are. I hope that's answered your questions. Thank you very much. They're great questions. Do we have any more questions?
Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is, can you hear me?
Can you start again?
I said thank you so much for your presentations. Can a historical fiction contain both telling and showing, or only telling?
Okay, I think the rules that apply to historical fiction are the same rules. Having said that, rules, you know, do we have rules or not? I think that historical fiction, if it's a work of imagination, a complete work of imagination, is an opportunity to show the reader that life in Tudor England, let's say, I mean, I just read a wonderful book set in Tudor England about a child who gets the plague and about the effect of that on the family. And it's really just an amazing book. So the author had researched a lot about the medicines that were used, about the ways in which communities closed down around the plague, about how people tried to keep themselves safe, how the plague was in fact sent, this child caught the plague through a bundle of cloth that was sent to the family in the countryside in England. And that was quite common because, of course, the plague was, people were infected by the plague by being bitten by fleas. And the cloth that turned up had fleas in it, and the child was bitten by a flea. So the author had researched it all, and all of the historical fact was absolutely clear, but she'd fictionalized it. So she'd created characters, she'd created a family, she'd created the family dynamic. There was siblings. There was the dynamic in the family. The use of medicine was historically accurate in the terms of what people did, how people tried to treat the plague. But the story was fiction. So she showed us through her fiction how people lived. And I think it's a combination. I think historical fiction, the best historical fiction, is a combination of showing us how people lived in the past and telling us how people lived, but doing it carefully. In some ways, writing historical fiction, we talked about research, and the last question, one of the last questions was also about researching. Historical fiction is perhaps the genre that most depends on research, because if you're writing something set in a real time where real people lived, I feel it's kind of incumbent on the author to, when they're including facts about that life, to get those facts right. I read you a bit earlier on today from the book, The Deep Blue Between, and the girl is reading newspapers. She's learnt to read and she's reading newspapers. Well, those were real newspapers that you could read in Ghana, published in English in the late 1880s. And the author researched them. And she went to the library and she read back issues of those newspapers in order to see what kind of stories were featured in the newspapers. And she researched the Ashanti Wars, and she researched the delegation that was sent to England to try to broker peace with the Queen Victoria, which was unsuccessful. So she researched all of that, but it's sort of like the wallpaper of her novel. It's not the actual substance of the room in which her characters live, but it informs everything that happens. So historical fiction does allow you to do a bit of both, showing and telling, but it also gives you the great canvas, the most, I think, exciting canvas for research. So any more questions? Lucky, I think you were going to, I saw your hand go up earlier on. Great. Oh, I'm sorry, I think you're on mute.
Okay.
Can you start again?
Okay.
Cool.
All right. My question actually is on what majorly makes a children literature a children literature? Is it the language, the character selection, the thematic preoccupation, or the plot? And is it possible to write a children literature with no children in it at all?
Thank you very much. It's a great question. I personally, I think the thing that defines children's literature is the age of the characters in the book. I personally find children's literature with lots of adults in it driving the narrative, driving the plot, problematic, because I think for children's literature to be truly empowering to children, it needs to have children at the center of the action. I think the themes in children's literature are the themes of adult literature, and their family, friendship, grief, happiness, journeys, discovery, all of those things that we read in adult literature, we read in children's literature, but the way we look at it in a children's book is how an 8 or a 10 or a 14-year-old would experience those issues. And we have to move it into that realm of experience. I think we can address any theme in a children's novel. I think children's novels deal with very difficult themes, very complex themes, as well as fun, easy themes about school life and new pets, and things that are on the surface much lighter. But there's the most amazing books for children that deal with really difficult themes. They deal with themes of grief. They deal with themes of living in a house in which parents are unhappy with one another. They deal with themes of neglect. They deal with themes of abuse. They deal with themes of climate change. They deal with themes of homelessness. All of those themes can be handled in a children's book, but they're handled in a way that isn't too graphic and isn't. It very much puts the child at the center. And in terms of language, again, one of the things that I know is of concern is using language that, swear words. It's difficult to include swear words in a children's book. However, very often in any exchange between two people in which there's heightened emotions, you kind of want expletives. But often what people do in children's books is they invent a word so that it doesn't have the connotations and the shock factor of the swear words that we can't even say here in this conversation. But you would hear outside on the street, if somebody bashed into your car, everybody would jump out and start swearing. But it would be very difficult to put that into a children's book. But you can make up a swear word, or you can make up a word that's sort of like, blast, but people know blast, but you can create a word that in the context of the novel is quite clear that it's used sparingly and it's used at moments of great anxiety or excitement. So I think the defining thing for me on what makes a children's book for children and not for adults is the age of the protagonists, and that the story is centered around those young people, and that those young people are in charge. They are the action, they're the drivers of the action, and they're also the characters who find the resolutions, who conclude the action. That's very important. If an adult comes in and starts sorting it out, you disempower the children, if that's a word, and that isn't a good thing. I think children need to be empowered. Literature is a really important way of empowering children, and because it's fiction, and often in real life, children are disempowered by adults. Adults take away the power of children, but because it's fiction, we're able to make up those stories and put children in the driving seat. So I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much.
Sorry,
do we have any more questions?
Sorry, I just wanted to. Can I go on, please?
Yes, Cynthia. Sorry, I think Cynthia was going to ask a question. Can we go back to her? Where is she?
Hey. Okay, so
Okay. I just wanted to buttress what you said about adult content. Well, not adult, like having adult characters in children's book. I remember when I was 7 years old, and I wanted children's books, and my dad would buy me African literature. Then I'm talking out of a personal experience. And then you had, for children literature, what he would buy was One Man, One Machete. Like they had like this 40,000 or word count. And then I found out that I didn't really enjoy those books at all. And most of the classics that we read while growing up, even in Nigeria, you find out that a whole lot of characters there were like adult characters. And so you find I didn't connect at all. I didn't like those books, but because my dad bought those books, I had to read them. But I found myself connecting more with Beauty and the Beast. I found myself connecting more with Cinderella and people, content that really portrayed like children book, a children character. So I am just saying it to buttress the fact that even while I was a child of 7, 8, 9 years old, and I was given books to read that had adult characters with very complicated themes. And so because of that, in the class one day, they told us to write a children's book in class. And I was writing about a man that got married to an illiterate wife. I had 2 wives, and the teacher was like, "What is this that you have written?" I told you a children's, book. So I'm talking about the fact that thank God for this workshop. Like, I'm not even knowing now that a children's book, must have, children characters driving it, or else those children that you're trying to connect with may not actually be connected with the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Cynthia, can we come back to your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, if I'm writing, for example, dialogue in English, and then at some point the character goes into like a native language, how do I translate it so that the reader can understand? Like, how do you do it?
Well, quite often that in books we see if somebody is dual language, or if we have 2 characters and one person, if the majority of the book is in English, but one character whose mother tongue is different will speak in the mother tongue. It's a careful positioning of that local language in a context in which it's clear what the character's saying. So if for example, one character asks in English, so your character who speaks in the mother tongue comes home and they've been to the markets, they've gone to do some shopping or something, and they come into the house and they're exhausted and their hair's all a mess and their shopping bag's gone. And the person in English can say, "Oh, what's happened? What you look, what's happened? And the person in the mother tongue can say, oh, "I was robbed," in their mother tongue. Then the person in English can say, "Oh, did they take everything?" So you can sort of you can put the languages in context to one another, where the question and answer helps make sense of what the person's seeing. If you're publishing a dual language book, then yes, you will have to have translations. But I think you can, if you've set up your characters well, if you've created a clear scenario, if you've made it obvious what's happening in terms of your description, your setting, your voice, all of those things we've been talking about, you can often show what that character's saying as much as have them say it with words. I'm going to ask if Debbie can join our conversation now, because what we'd like to do, we've only got 10 minutes left. What I'd like to do is give you a quick chat about Accord Literary and about the work that we're doing, and to see if it might be of interest for you to stay in touch with us. Yes, here's Debbie. So Debbie and I are working together. Debbie's based in Accra, I'm based in London. And because of the pandemic, we haven't seen each other for quite a long time, apart from on Zoom. So we're looking forward to getting back into the same physical space as each other. But we started this project a couple of years ago. And Debbie, I wonder if you would mind chatting a little bit.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we're hoping to remain in touch with you. These workshops are something we hope to continue to do, and our goal is to help you to grow in your along your journey to your writing journey. And one thing we keep saying at our court is that the world has changed in a way where a couple of years ago it was more difficult for African writers for children to be published around the world, but that's different now, because there's a big hunger for diverse books internationally, but there's also a big interest in African writers, because so many African writers have done well in the adult fiction world that we think that there can be huge opportunities for writers who are concentrating on writing children's literature, writing stories for young readers, can be published abroad. So through our court, we represent authors and we connect them to publishing opportunities around the world. We currently have an open call ongoing, and we ask when you check out our website, www.accordliterary.com, you will find the submission details. We ask you to consider sending in some of your stories. If we think that what you send in is a good fit for what we're looking for, we will reach out to you, and hopefully we can begin a relationship. What that looks like is that we will match you with an editor to help you to work through your story till we have a publishing ready manuscript, at which point we will connect that with our publishing partners, with sub-agents who will do their job to try and get us a publishing deal. If you connect with us on social media too, we do have different training opportunities that do come up. We are hoping throughout this year to have more of such training, and sometimes also when there are other opportunities for writers, we're able to share them through those networks. So we really do hope to remain connected with you.
Thank you very much, everybody. We've really enjoyed meeting everybody today. It's, muting and unmuting aside, it's been a really great conversation. I've enjoyed so much listening to you all that have joined in with reading. And what I will do when we're finished, I'll send my writing exercises, which includes at the end a list of podcasts and books that I've read from today that might be of interest to people. There's some great podcasts that people should be listening to with fiction, podcasts about children's literature, podcasts talking generally about writing, as well as podcasts which are just stories, which are just heaven to listen to. So I'm going to make a few suggestions, but it's totally tiny number of suggestions, because clearly the world is full of content, and there's a lot to be found out there. Also, I'll send it to the team at Akada, who have your email addresses, and will send the material on to you. I would urge everybody to keep writing, to keep doing writing exercises, to keep thinking of ways in which they want to polish their story, to keep thinking about new stories. There's no end to this journey of writing, and it's a fun path, and there's a lot to be picked up, a lot of information to be picked up and shared along the way. And I hope you enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed meeting you and reading your stories. And we really hope to hear from you soon at Accord, because we're all about the stories and sharing them with the world. So 5 minutes early, but I think before my voice cracks completely and I can't talk again for 2 days, which might not be too irritating to some people around here, I'm going to stop. And thank you so much, everybody. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.